I am Leon Banks. I am 72 years old. For 3 years, I could not bring myself to open my late wife's safe deposit box. But when I finally walked into that bank vault, the manager locked the heavy steel door behind us, pulled me aside, and whispered that someone had already tried to break into it. She handed me a tablet showing security footage from just 3 days prior. It was my son-in-law sweating, slamming forged legal documents on the counter, demanding they drill the lock. He thought I was just a senile old man who would quietly fade away into a nursing home while he stole my legacy. He was dead wrong. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to teach an arrogant family member a lesson they will never forget. The air inside the First National Bank vault was thick and freezing. It smelled like old paper and polished steel. I stood there leaning my weight onto my cane, holding the small brass key I had kept hidden in my top drawer since my wife Beatrice passed away. Ms. Davies, the branch manager who had known my wife for 2 decades, did not lead me straight to the wall of metal boxes. Instead, she locked the heavy vault door behind us. The loud clack of the metal bolt echoing in the quiet room made my chest tighten. She pulled a sleek tablet from her blazer pocket. Her hands were shaking slightly. "Leon," she said, her voice dropping to a cautious whisper, "I need to show you something before you open box 402. She tapped the screen and handed it to me. The video was dated just 3 days ago. The silent security footage showed the main lobby of the bank. And there he was, Trent Sterling, my 36-year-old white son-in-law, the man who had married my only biological daughter Maya 5 years ago. He was standing at Ms. Davies' desk, his face flushed red, arguing aggressively. Even without audio, I could see the sheer arrogance in his posture, the way he pointed his finger right at her face, the pure entitlement radiating from him. Ms. Davies tapped the screen to pause it. "He came in on Tuesday, Leon," she explained softly. "He presented a power of attorney document. It had your signature on it, heavily notarized, giving him full legal control over all your financial assets. He demanded that we drill open Beatrice's box immediately. He said you were suffering from severe cognitive decline and that he needed to liquidate the assets to pay for your medical care." I stared at the frozen image of Trent's face, the absolute, unadulterated audacity of this boy. I never signed a power of attorney. My mind is as sharp as the day I wired my first commercial building down in the South Side 40 years ago. But Trent had been planting the seeds for this exact moment. The memory of last Sunday's family dinner flashed hot in my mind. Maya had invited me over to their sprawling, overly mortgaged house in the suburbs. I was sitting at the dining table, quietly eating my roast beef, minding my own business. Trent had walked into the dining room and casually tossed a glossy, cheap-looking brochure right onto my plate, knocking over my glass of water. The water spilled everywhere, soaking into the tablecloth. Trent did not even apologize. He just tapped the brochure with his manicured finger. Shady Pines Care Facility, the cover read. It was a rundown, state-funded nursing home on the absolute worst side of town, a place where they drug the elderly and leave them staring at walls until they expire. I looked up at Trent, waiting for the punchline of a bad joke, but he was not joking. He gave me that condescending, pitiful smile he always wore when he looked at me. "It is time to face reality, old man," Trent had said, pouring himself a glass of expensive bourbon that my daughter paid for. "You are slipping. You forgot to close the garage door last week. You are getting confused. You simply cannot manage that big 4-bedroom house anymore. It is a burden on you, and frankly it is a burden on Maya and me, having to constantly check up on you." Maya had just looked down at her plate, stirring her mashed potatoes, too terrified of her own husband to defend her own father. I had stayed silent that night. Not because I was weak, and certainly not because I was senile. I stayed silent because a master electrician knows you never touch a live wire until you know exactly where the current is flowing. Trent mistook my silence for submission. He thought I was just a tired, broken-down old black man who would quietly pack my bags and let him steal the house I built with my own 2 hands. He thought his forged paperwork would be his golden ticket. But Ms. Davies is nobody's fool. She looked at me, her eyes filled with a fierce loyalty to my late wife. "I told him our policy requires a 48-hour legal review for any power of attorney document presented without the account holder present," she explained. He threw a fit, threatened to sue the bank, and stormed out. I called our legal department immediately. The notary stamp on his document was fake Leon. It is a complete forgery. I took a deep breath, the cold air of the vault filling my lungs. I felt a dangerous, quiet rage building in my chest. Trent was not just disrespectful anymore. He was a criminal. He was actively trying to erase my independence, lock me away in a miserable facility, and rob me blind. "Thank you, Ms. Davies," I said, handing the tablet back to her. My voice was steady, betraying none of the storm brewing inside me. "I will handle Trent. Right now, I just need to see what my wife left for me." She nodded, stepping aside and gesturing to the wall of gleaming metal doors. I walked over to box 402. I inserted the brass key into the lock while she inserted the master key. We turned them at the exact same time. The lock clicked open with a heavy, satisfying sound. Ms. Davies pulled the long metal container from the slot, placed it gently on the private viewing table in the center of the room, and excused herself, leaving me completely alone. I stood over the box for a long moment. Beatrice and I had been married for 42 years. She was a hospital administrator, a brilliant, beautiful, no-nonsense woman who handled our taxes while I handled the contracting business. When she got sick, it was sudden. We barely had time to say goodbye. She told me she had a safe deposit box, but she made me promise not to open it until I felt I truly needed her guidance. "Well, Beatrice," I whispered to the empty room, "I need you now more than ever." I lifted the heavy metal lid. I honestly expected to find her grandmother's antique pearl necklace, maybe some old savings bonds, or the deed to our first house. But the box was empty of jewelry. Instead, it was packed to the brim with thick, bound folders. I reached in and pulled out the first stack of papers. The logo at the top of the page belonged to a private offshore wealth management firm based in the Cayman Islands. I frowned, adjusting my reading glasses. As I scanned the numbers on the first page, my heart stopped. I blinked, took my glasses off, rubbed my eyes, and put them back on. The balance at the bottom of the page read $8.5 million. $8.5 million. My breath caught in my throat. I flipped frantically through the next few pages. They were trust documents, investment portfolios, all in my name and Beatrice's name. But that was not all. Nestled beneath the mountain of bank statements was a small black USB flash drive and a thick envelope with my name written on it in Beatrice's unmistakable, elegant cursive handwriting. My hands were trembling as I tore the envelope open. I pulled out 3 pages of closely written text. I unfolded the crisp paper and began to read. "Leon, my love," the letter began. "If you are reading this, it means you finally came to the bank. But more importantly, it means Trent has already tried to steal it." I took a sharp breath. The air in the vault felt heavier now. I kept reading. "I never told you about the money because I needed to protect you, and I needed to protect our daughter Maya. 10 years ago, a brilliant young surgeon at the hospital approached me about a new medical imaging technology he was developing. He needed seed money. I took a massive risk. I took $50,000 from my separate retirement account and invested it into his startup. For years, nothing happened. Then 3 years ago, right before my diagnosis, the company received federal approval and was bought out by a major pharmaceutical corporation. My shares were suddenly worth $8,500,000. I lowered the letter for a second, rubbing my chest. $8.5 million. My Beatrice had built an empire in total silence. I looked back down at the page. "I wanted to tell you, Leon," she wrote. "I wanted us to travel the world and buy that lake house you always talked about. But right when the money cleared, Maya brought Trent Sterling into our lives. You saw a confident young corporate executive, but I saw a parasite. I work in hospital administration, Leon. I know how to spot a liar and a fraud. I noticed his expensive suits and his luxury car did not match the timeline of his career. I hired a private investigator. What they found chilled my blood. Trent was completely broke, worse than broke. He had secretly stolen Maya's identity. He used her social security number to take out massive high-interest loans and open multiple credit cards. He maxed them all out and defaulted. He ruined our daughter's credit before they were even married." My vision blurred with pure rage. My grip tightened on the paper, crumbling the edges. That white boy had not just married my daughter, he had targeted her. He had systematically dismantled her financial independence so she could never leave him. I kept reading. Beatrice's words were sharp and calculating. I knew if I told Maya, she would confront him and Trent would manipulate his way out of it or hurt her. I knew if I told you Leon, you would put him in the hospital and you would end up in prison. I could not let that happen to my husband. So I took the money and I locked it away in a blind offshore trust in the Cayman Islands. It is an ironclad legal fortress. Trent can never touch it. But I knew he would eventually come for your house. I knew he would try to declare you incompetent once I was gone. He is desperate, and desperate men make sloppy mistakes. I turned to the final page of the letter. Plug the flash drive into your computer, Leon. I recorded conversations before I died. Conversations Trent did not know I heard. He is dangerous, my love. Do not let him win. Use the money. Destroy him. Protect our daughter. I love you, Beatrice. I carefully folded the letter and slid it into the inner pocket of my coat. I grabbed the small black flash drive, the stack of offshore banking documents, and packed everything back into the metal safe deposit box. I locked the box, slid it back into the wall, and walked out of the vault. Ms. Davies was waiting by her desk. I gave her a curt nod and walked straight out the front doors of the bank into the freezing Chicago afternoon. The cold wind hit my face, but I did not feel it. My blood was boiling. I walked to my 1968 Mustang, unlocked the door, and got behind the wheel. I sat there in the parking lot, gripping the leather steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I am a master electrician. My whole life has been about managing power, finding the current, grounding the dangerous wires. Trent Sterling was a live wire sparking wildly, and he had just stepped into my grid. I drove straight home. The 4-bedroom house I built with my own hands felt entirely different when I walked through the front door. It was no longer just a quiet place for a retired widower to live out his days. It was a battleground. I locked the deadbolt behind me. I marched directly into my home office and sat down at my heavy oak desk. I pulled the black flash drive from my coat pocket and plugged it into my laptop. The computer chimed. A folder popped up on the screen. It was labeled simply with Trent's name. I clicked it open. Inside were 5 audio files dated 3.5 years ago, right around the time Beatrice got sick. I took a deep breath, bracing myself, and clicked play on the first file. There was a few seconds of rustling fabric. Beatrice must have hidden her phone in the living room while Maya and Trent were visiting. Then I heard it. Trent's voice ringing out from my computer speakers. It was not the polite, respectful tone he used when I was in the room. It was nasty. It was dripping with venom and condescension. "I told you to handle this, Maya," he hissed. "I told you to talk to your mother about the money. She is dying anyway. We need that cash now." Then I heard Maya, my beautiful, smart, strong daughter. But she did not sound strong. She sounded terrified. Her voice was shaking and small. "Trent, please do not talk about my mother like that. She is sick. I cannot ask her for money right now. It is disrespectful. You promised we would be fine on your salary." The sound of something shattering echoed through the audio file. A glass being thrown against the wall. I flinched, physically recoiling in my desk chair. "Do not lecture me about respect," Trent snarled. "You are nothing without me, Maya. Your credit is garbage. You cannot even rent an apartment without my signature. You are completely dependent on me. You think anyone else would want you. You think you could survive out there alone. You are pathetic." My heart pounded a furious rhythm against my ribs. I wanted to reach through the screen and choke the life out of him. He was gaslighting her. He had destroyed her credit himself and was now using it as a weapon to keep her trapped. I clicked the next file. It was dated just weeks before Beatrice passed. The voices were clearer this time. "I cannot keep doing this," Maya Trent was saying. "The debt collectors are calling my office. My investors are asking questions. You need to get your father to sign over the house. Once the old lady is gone, he is going to be alone and useless. We get him to sign the deed over to us and we take out a massive equity loan. It is a gold mine sitting right there in that neighborhood." "I cannot do that," Trent Maya cried. "He built that house. It is his pride and joy. I will not steal my father's home." "Then I am leaving you," Trent fired back, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "I will file for divorce tomorrow. I will take the cars. I will leave you with the debt. I will tell everyone at your firm that you are financially incompetent and ruin your career. You will have nothing, Maya. You get the old man to sign the house over to me, or you are completely finished. I am giving you a choice. Your senile father or your husband. Pick one." The audio file ended. The silence in my office was deafening. I sat there in the quiet house, my chest heaving. The sheer evil of this boy was beyond comprehension. He had trapped my daughter in a psychological prison. He was emotionally abusing her, holding her hostage with the very financial ruin he created. And he was targeting me. He saw me as nothing but a brick-and-mortar piggy bank to be smashed open and emptied. He thought I was weak. He thought I was stupid. He thought because my hair was gray and I walked with a cane that my brain had turned to mush. I reached into my pocket and touched the letter Beatrice wrote. My wife had given me the ultimate weapon, $8.5 million of untraceable offshore money. She had given me the ammunition to utterly destroy Trent Sterling. I did not just want to stop him from taking my house. I wanted to obliterate his entire existence. I wanted to tear down his arrogant facade, expose his crimes, and watch him lose everything he claimed to own. I wanted to look him in the eyes while his world burned to ashes. Suddenly, the silence in the room was shattered. My cell phone buzzed loudly on the desk, vibrating against the wood. I looked at the caller ID. It was Maya. I took a deep breath, closing my eyes and forcing my heart rate to slow down. I could not let her know I knew the truth. Not yet. If I told her, she might panic and confront Trent. He would realize the trap was set and he would run. I had to play the game. I had to become the exact person Trent thought I was. A confused, tired old man. I picked up the phone and pressed answer. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, keeping my voice soft and slightly raspy. "Dad," Maya said. Her voice was shaking. I could hear the sheer terror vibrating through the phone speaker. She was breathing fast, like she was hiding in a closet. "Dad, I need you to listen to me carefully." "What is wrong, Maya?" I asked, feigning gentle confusion. "Are you all right, baby? You sound out of breath." "I am fine, Dad," she lied, her voice cracking on the words. "Dad, Trent is coming over to your house tonight. He is bringing a doctor with him, a friend of his. He says he just wants to check on your memory. He says you have been forgetting things and he wants to do a quick evaluation." My grip on the phone tightened until the plastic creaked. The ambush was starting. Trent was making his move. He had failed at the bank with the forged power of attorney, so now he was bringing a corrupt doctor directly into my living room to medically declare me incompetent. It was a coordinated strike. "Maya, I do not need a doctor," I said, making my voice sound shaky and defensive. "I am perfectly fine. Why is Trent bringing a stranger into my home? Please, Dad." Maya begged, breaking down into quiet sobs. "Please, just do what he says. Just cooperate with the doctor. Do not argue with Trent. Please, Dad, if you fight him, he gets so angry. He says if you do not pass the test, we have to put you in a home. Just answer the doctor's questions and let them leave. Please do this for me." Hearing my daughter beg me to submit to her abuser broke my heart into 1,000 pieces. She was so broken, so completely terrified of her husband that she was willing to let him lock her own father away just to keep the peace. I closed my eyes, feeling a tear slide down my weathered cheek. I would save her. I would save her even if she did not know she needed saving. "Okay, Maya," I said softly, letting my voice sound defeated and tired. "I will cooperate. I will not fight him. Tell Trent I will be waiting in the living room." "Thank you, Dad," Maya whispered, crying quietly. "I love you so much. I will come see you tomorrow, I promise." She hung up the phone. I lowered the device slowly, placing it down on the heavy oak desk. The sadness completely evaporated, leaving nothing but absolute cold, calculating resolve. The ambush was set for tonight. Trent thought he was walking into a house with a helpless old man. He had no idea he was walking into a high-voltage trap. I stood up from my desk, locked the flash drive and the bank documents into a hidden compartment under my floorboards, and walked into the living room to wait for my son-in-law. The show was about to begin. Let him bring his fake doctor. I was ready to play the fool. I am Leon Banks. I am 72 years old. My daughter Maya had just hung up the phone after begging me to cooperate with the ambush her husband was bringing to my doorstep. I stood in the center of my living room. The silence of the house was heavy, but my mind was racing with absolute clarity. I had to move fast. Trent and his hired doctor were on their way. I walked into my home office and knelt on the hardwood floor. 40 years as a master electrician and contractor meant I knew every single inch of this 4-bedroom house. I built it, I wired it, and I built secret compartments into it. I pressed my thumbs against the edge of the 3rd oak plank near the bookshelf and pushed down. The wood popped up, revealing a hidden floorboard safe. I carefully placed Beatrice's handwritten letter, the offshore bank statement showing $8.5 million, and the black flash drive containing Trent's abusive audio recordings into the dark metal cavity. I locked it tight and snapped the oak plank back into place. It was completely invisible. Nobody was getting their hands on my wife's legacy. But hiding the truth was only the first step of my plan. I needed leverage. I needed hard, undeniable proof of Trent's immediate crimes. I walked back into the living room and grabbed a small digital voice recorder from my toolbox. I turned it on, making sure the red recording light was active. I reached under the heavy mahogany coffee table and used a piece of electrical tape to stick the recorder directly under the center edge. It was completely out of sight but perfectly positioned to capture every single word spoken in that room. Then I sat down in my worn leather recliner. I took a deep breath. I let my shoulders slump. I let my hands tremble just a little bit. I softened my gaze, making my eyes look tired and unfocused. The powerful master electrician disappeared, and the frail, helpless old man took his place. The performance had to be flawless. 10 minutes later, I heard the sound of heavy tires crunching on the gravel driveway outside. It was Trent's oversized luxury SUV, the vehicle he bought using my daughter's stolen credit. The doorbell rang twice. It was a sharp, demanding sound. I did not get up immediately. I waited, letting them stand out in the cold Chicago evening. I wanted them to think I was too slow to answer. The door handle rattled, and then a key turned in the lock. Trent had made his own copy months ago without asking me. The heavy oak door swung open. Trent walked in, shaking the snow off his expensive wool coat. Right behind him was a man who looked entirely out of place. He wore a sharp tailored suit, an oversized gold watch, and a smile that looked like it belonged on a used car salesman instead of a medical professional. This was the man Trent had brought to steal my freedom. "Hello, Leon," Trent said. His voice was loud and slow, as if he were talking to a toddler. "I brought a friend to see you. This is Dr. Evans. He is just here to have a little chat with you. How are you feeling tonight?" I looked up at them, blinking slowly. I let my mouth hang open just a fraction of an inch. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice raspy and weak. I did not invite any doctors to my house. Trent exchanged a quick, triumphant look with Dr. Evans. "It is me, Trent," he said, stepping into the living room and taking off his coat. "Your son-in-law. Do you not remember me, Leon? We talked about this. Dr. Evans is here to do a standard wellness check. Maya wanted us to make sure you are doing okay living all by yourself in this big empty house." Dr. Evans stepped forward, extending a soft, perfectly manicured hand. "Good evening, Mr. Banks," he said smoothly. His voice was dripping with fake sympathy. "There is absolutely nothing to worry about. We just want to ask you a few simple questions. Just a little memory exercise. May I sit down?" I nodded slowly, pulling my cardigan tighter around my shoulders. I pointed a trembling finger toward the sofa directly above the hidden voice recorder. "Sit there," I murmured, looking away as if I were confused by the television screen being off. Dr. Evans sat down, crossing his legs and pulling a pristine leather notepad from his briefcase. Trent remained standing near the fireplace, leaning against the mantel with a smug, arrogant smirk plastered across his face. He looked like a predator cornering a wounded animal. He had no idea the animal was studying his every move. "All right, Mr. Banks." Dr. Evans began clicking his silver pen. "Let us start with something very easy. Can you tell me your full name and your date of birth?" I paused. I let the silence stretch out, making them wait. "Leon," I said softly. "Leon Arthur Banks. I was born in 1953. I think it was October," good Dr. Evans said, scribbling on his notepad. "And can you tell me what year it is right now?" I looked around the room as if searching for a calendar on the blank walls. I rubbed my forehead with a shaking hand. "It is 2018, I said, letting my voice trail off uncertainly. "No, wait. It is 2019. My wife Beatrice was just here. Did you see her go to the kitchen?" Trent actually bit his lip to stop himself from smiling too broadly. He looked at the doctor and gave a subtle nod. The doctor wrote down another note, his gold watch catching the light from the living room lamp. "Mr. Banks, your wife Beatrice passed away 3 years ago," Dr. Evans said, using that same sickeningly sweet tone. "Do you remember that?" I forced my eyes to widen in mock horror. I let my breathing become shallow and rapid. "No," I whispered, gripping the armrests of my leather chair. "No, she was just here. She was making coffee." "Why are you lying to me? Who sent you here? Please try to stay calm. Leon, Trent interrupted, stepping closer. You are just confused. This happens all the time now. Remember last week when you left the stove on? You could have burned the whole house down. I had never left the stove on in my entire life. Trent was fabricating evidence right in front of the doctor, building a false narrative of danger and incompetence. I looked at Trent with wide, terrified eyes. I did not leave the stove on, I protested weakly. You are trying to trick me. You want to take my house. Dr. Evans leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. Mr. Banks, paranoia is a very common symptom of cognitive decline. Nobody wants to take your house. We just want to make sure you are safe. Can you tell me who the current president of the United States is? I stared blankly at the doctor. I let a long, painful minute pass. I shook my head slowly. The man from the television, I muttered quietly. The one with the suit. I do not remember his name. I am very tired. I want you to leave my house now. Dr. Evans sighed heavily, closing his leather notepad. He looked at Trent with a grave expression that was completely theatrical. Trent, I think we have seen enough here tonight. The disorientation is significant. The memory loss is profound. The paranoia regarding his property and his safety is a classic indicator. I am afraid the cognitive decline is severe. Trent crossed his arms, trying to look solemn, but the greed in his eyes was blinding. What does this mean, doctor? What are our next steps? I am so worried about his safety. Maya and I cannot be here 24 hours a day to watch him. Dr. Evans pulled a pre-printed medical form from his briefcase. It is my professional opinion that Mr. Banks can no longer live independently. He is a danger to himself. I am signing a preliminary evaluation of severe cognitive decline tonight. This document will allow you to initiate the emergency guardianship process. You will be able to make medical and financial decisions on his behalf. I strongly recommend placing him in a secure memory care facility as soon as possible. Trent practically drooled as Dr. Evans signed his name at the bottom of the paper. The sound of the pen scratching against the document was the sound of my supposed freedom being signed away. Trent reached out and took the paper, holding it like a winning lottery ticket. Thank you, Dr. Evans, Trent said, his voice dripping with fake gratitude. This is a tragedy for our family, but I know it is the right thing to do. We just want Leon to be safe. I sat in my chair, staring blankly at the floor, playing the role of the defeated old man perfectly. Inside my mind, I was calculating every single variable. They had committed forgery, fraud, and medical malpractice in the span of 15 minutes. They had handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy them. Let us go, Trent, Dr. Evans said, standing up and buttoning his suit jacket. Let him rest. The medication you give him should help keep him calm until the transfer next week. Trent nodded, putting his coat back on. Good night, Leon, Trent said loudly, patting me roughly on the shoulder. Try to get some sleep. We will take good care of you. I did not answer. I just rocked back and forth slightly in my chair, staring at the wall. Trent and the doctor walked toward the front door. The heavy oak door opened and the freezing night air rushed into the house. The door clicked shut and the deadbolt locked. I sat perfectly still for exactly 5 minutes. I listened to the sound of Trent's heavy SUV starting up in the driveway. I waited until the sound of the engine faded away down the street. Then the frail, confused old man vanished completely. I sat up straight. My hands were no longer trembling. My eyes were sharp and focused. I stood up from my leather recliner and walked over to the mahogany coffee table. I knelt down on the rug, reached under the wooden edge, and peeled the electrical tape away. I pulled the digital voice recorder free. The small red light was still blinking steadily. I pressed the stop button, then I pressed rewind. I needed to hear exactly what they said when they thought they were out of earshot. I needed to hear the conversation that took place in my hallway right before they walked out the front door. I held the small speaker close to my ear and pressed play. The audio was crystal clear. I heard the sound of Dr. Evans closing his briefcase. Then I heard Trent's voice. Thanks, Doc, Trent said. His tone was no longer sympathetic. It was pure cold business. That performance was perfect. He did not suspect a thing. He is completely gone. Trent, the doctor replied with a nasty chuckle. You were right. He is a sitting duck. That evaluation form is bulletproof. The judge will grant you emergency guardianship by Tuesday. I heard the rustle of winter coats being put on. Then Trent spoke again, and his words sent a jolt of pure adrenaline straight through my veins. Once he is committed next week, the $800,000 house is mine. Trent said, his voice thick with greedy anticipation. "I already have a buyer lined up through a shell company. I will wire your cut on Friday, Doc. Pleasure doing business with you." The heavy front door opened and shut on the recording, followed by the sound of silence. I pressed the stop button on the recorder. My heart was beating with a steady, powerful rhythm. I was holding a digital confession of medical fraud, conspiracy, and elder abuse. Trent had just handed me the keys to his own prison cell. He thought he was playing chess against a blind man, but he had just walked blindly into a minefield. The rage inside me was cold and precise. They were planning to steal my home and lock me in a nightmare, but they were about to learn that you never try to steal the house from the man who built it. I slipped the voice recorder into my pocket. The real war was about to begin. I am Leon Banks. I am 72 years old. The morning after Trent brought that corrupt doctor into my home, I woke up before the sun even had a chance to rise over the Chicago skyline. I did not sleep a single minute that night. My mind was running like a high-voltage generator. I dressed in my best charcoal suit, the one Beatrice bought for me to wear to Maya and Trent's wedding. Looking at myself in the mirror, I did not see the frail and confused old man I had played the night before. I saw a man going to war. I grabbed the digital voice recorder from my desk drawer and placed it carefully into my inner breast pocket right next to the flash drive my wife had left me. I walked out into the freezing morning air and slid into the driver's seat of my 1968 Mustang. The engine roared to life with a deep and powerful rumble. As I drove down the Dan Ryan Expressway toward the heart of downtown Chicago, the icy wind whipped against the windows, but the heater kept the cabin warm. I watched the towering skyscrapers of the city emerge from the morning fog. I had helped wire some of those very buildings during my 40 years as a master electrician. I knew the bones of this city. I knew how power flowed. Trent thought he could just unplug me and toss me into the dark. He was about to find out that I had friends in very high places. I pulled into the underground parking garage of a sleek glass high-rise on Wacker Drive. This was the headquarters of Vanguard and Associates. I took the private elevator straight to the top floor. I was not there to see just any lawyer. I was there to see Evelyn Carter. Evelyn was a senior partner at the firm, a ruthless corporate attorney, and above all else, she was Beatrice's oldest and most fiercely loyal friend. She was a striking African-American woman in her late 60s with a mind as sharp as a scalpel and a reputation for completely dismantling anyone who crossed her in a courtroom. When I walked into her massive corner office overlooking Lake Michigan, she stood up immediately. "Leon," she said, her voice warm but laced with immediate concern. "You look like a man who has not slept in a week. Please sit down and tell me what is going on." I did not waste time with pleasantries. I sat down in the leather chair across from her expansive mahogany desk. I reached into my coat pocket and placed the black flash drive and the digital voice recorder directly onto the polished wood. I looked her dead in the eyes. "Beatrice left me a secret, Evelyn," I said, my voice steady and cold. "And my son-in-law Trent is trying to steal it by having me locked away in a state-funded psychiatric facility." Evelyn did not gasp. She did not express shock. She simply narrowed her eyes and picked up the digital recorder. "Play it," she commanded. I hit the play button and let the audio fill the pristine office. Evelyn sat perfectly still as she listened to Trent and Dr. Evans plotting in my hallway. She heard Trent thank the corrupt doctor for signing the fake cognitive decline evaluation. She heard the doctor assure Trent that the judge would grant emergency guardianship by Tuesday. And then she heard the final nail in the coffin. She heard Trent promise to wire the doctor his cut of the money on Friday as soon as my house was sold to a shell company. When the recording finished clicking off into silence, Evelyn let out a slow, measured breath. She folded her hands, resting her chin on her knuckles. "That arrogant, foolish little boy," she whispered, her voice dripping with pure, absolute venom. "He actually documented his own federal conspiracy. Leon, we are not just going to stop him. We are going to bury him under the jail. But first we need to know exactly how deep his desperation goes. A man does not pull a stunt this reckless unless he is completely out of options." Evelyn spun her chair around and began typing furiously on her dual monitors. She bypassed standard public records, diving deep into financial databases and corporate registries that only elite law firms could access. I sat quietly watching her work. The clacking of her keyboard sounded like the ticking of a time bomb. For 10 solid minutes, the only sound in the office was the hum of the computer processor and the occasional sharp intake of breath from Evelyn. "What are you finding?" I finally asked, unable to stand the heavy silence any longer. Evelyn shook her head, keeping her eyes glued to the screen. "Leon," she said softly, "you are not going to believe this. Trent has been lying to Maya about his job for an entire year. He was fired from his corporate executive position 12 months ago for gross financial misconduct. They chose not to press charges to avoid a public scandal, but they stripped him of his severance and blacklisted him in the industry. He has not brought home a legitimate paycheck since last November." My stomach twisted into a tight, hard knot. Maya thought her husband was a successful businessman providing for their future. He had been leaving the house every morning in a tailored suit, pretending to go to an office that had locked him out a year ago. "How are they paying their mortgage?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "How is he keeping the lights on?" Evelyn hit another key, bringing up a new page of data. "He is not," she replied grimly. "Their house is in pre-foreclosure. He has been taking out massive high-interest loans using my identity, just like Beatrice warned you. But it gets much worse, Leon. Trent is not just a fraud. He is a completely desperate, degenerate gambler. 7 months ago, he liquidated their entire savings account and poured $400,000 into an unregistered cryptocurrency scam. The platform collapsed overnight. The money vanished into thin air. He lost everything they had to their name." I leaned forward, resting my hands on my cane. $400,000, I repeated, feeling the sheer weight of that number crash down on me. My daughter was married to a man who had financially ruined her without her even knowing. Evelyn turned her chair back around to face me, her expression dead serious. "It is worse than just being broke, Leon. Trent did not just lose their savings. When the crypto market crashed, he tried to chase his losses. He went to unofficial lenders. He went to loan sharks operating out of the South Side. These are not banks, Leon. These are extremely dangerous people who do not take excuses and do not care about legal boundaries. According to the dark web financial registries my investigators just pulled, Trent owes them $300,000. He has missed his last 3 payments. He is weeks, maybe days away from having his legs broken, or worse. He is a drowning man, Leon, and he is perfectly willing to pull you and Maya down into the dark water with him just to catch a single breath of air." I closed my eyes, letting the horrifying reality of the situation wash over me. Trent was not just a greedy son-in-law waiting for his inheritance. He was a cornered rat facing physical violence from criminal syndicates. My $800,000 house was the only tangible asset he had left to exploit. He needed to sell my home immediately to pay off his debts and save his own life. My freedom and my sanity were just collateral damage in his desperate bid for survival. I opened my eyes and looked at Evelyn. "We need to stop him, Evelyn," I said, my voice hard and resolute. "We need to freeze everything. We need to go to the police right now and hand over these recordings before he files that emergency guardianship paperwork with the court." Evelyn raised a hand, stopping me. "Wait, Leon," she said, her eyes darting back to the computer screen. "There is one more thing. I am running a title search on your property address right now." She typed rapidly, her manicured nails clicking sharply against the keys. The color slowly drained from her face. She looked up at me and I saw genuine fear in her eyes. "Leon," she whispered, "we are out of time. Trent has already listed your house for sale. He transferred the deed to a shell company. The closing date is the exact day after you are scheduled to be shipped to the nursing home. He is burying you alive to save his own miserable life. We must fight. Now. I am Leon Banks. I am 72 years old." Leaving Evelyn's office that afternoon felt like walking through a nightmare. The freezing Chicago wind whipped against my heavy wool coat, but the coldness in my chest had nothing to do with the weather. My son-in-law Trent was not just a greedy opportunist. He was a desperate criminal drowning in dangerous debt. He was ready to sell my house to a shell company and lock me in a state-funded psychiatric ward just to save his own miserable life. But the most terrifying question remained entirely unanswered today. Where did my daughter Maya fit into all of this? Was she a willing accomplice to my destruction, or was she just another victim trapped in Trent's web of lies? I needed to know the truth before I unleashed the full force of my late wife Beatrice's $8.5 million offshore trust. I drove my 1968 Mustang back to my neighborhood and parked in the driveway. I sat in the quiet cabin of the car, gripping the leather steering wheel tightly. I pulled out my cell phone and dialed my daughter's phone number immediately right now. Maya answered on the 4th ring. Her voice sounded thin and strained. "Hello, Dad," she said hesitantly. "Are you feeling all right today?" Trent told me the doctor said your memory was getting much worse. I forced myself to swallow the bitter taste of anger in my mouth. I am having a good day today, Maya, I replied, making my voice sound steady but gentle. My mind feels very clear this morning. I would really like to see you. Just the two of us. Let us go have lunch at that upscale bistro downtown we always loved to visit together today. Maya hesitated for a long moment. I could hear the nervous, shallow breathing on the other end of the line. I know Trent likes to keep a close eye on you, I added softly, but I just want to spend an hour with my little girl. Please, Maya. Finally, she agreed. We arranged to meet at 1 o'clock. I went inside my house, washed my face, and changed into a clean pressed shirt. I looked at the framed photograph of Beatrice on my hallway table. I promised her silently that I would find out the absolute truth right now. I arrived at the restaurant early and requested a quiet corner booth. The bistro was elegant, filled with soft lighting and the quiet murmur of wealthy patrons. 20 minutes later, Maya walked through the glass doors. She was dressed impeccably in a designer silk blouse and a tailored skirt. She carried an expensive leather handbag and wore large, dark sunglasses, even though it was completely overcast outside. She looked every inch the successful suburban housewife living a perfect country club illusion. But as she slid into the booth directly across from me, I saw the horrible hidden tension very clearly. Her shoulders were stiff. Her hands were trembling slightly as she picked up the menu. She took off her sunglasses, revealing dark, exhausted circles under her eyes that expensive makeup could not completely hide. "Hi, Dad," she said, offering a fragile, brittle smile. "You look well today." I nodded slowly, taking a sip of my water. "I am doing just fine, Maya. I wanted to talk to you because I have been thinking a lot lately. I have been thinking about you and Trent." Maya stiffened immediately. Her eyes darted around the fancy restaurant, looking extremely anxious and nervous now. "What about us?" she asked, her voice dropping to a defensive whisper. "We are perfectly fine, Dad. Trent is working very hard on a major corporate merger right now. He is just under a lot of pressure. That is why he has been so concerned about your health. He wants to make sure you are safe because he cannot be there to watch you every single day." I leaned forward, resting my hands on the polished wooden table. I decided to drop the confused old man act just for a brief, significant moment. I needed to carefully test her now. "Maya," I said, my voice dropping an octave, carrying the weight of absolute authority. "I know things. I know Trent lost his corporate executive job 12 months ago. I know he has not brought home a legitimate paycheck in an entire year." The color drained completely out of Maya's face. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. "Dad," she stammered, looking absolutely terrified. "What are you talking about? That is crazy. You are getting confused again. Trent is doing wonderfully. You are just having another one of your paranoid old episodes today." I did not back down. I kept my eyes locked directly on hers. "I know about the massive high-interest loans he took out using your identity, Maya. I know he lost $400,000 in a cryptocurrency scam, and that your house is facing imminent foreclosure. I know he is in serious trouble with dangerous loan sharks from the south side. I know he is drowning in debt and that he is incredibly desperate." Maya's hands gripped the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned bright white. Her breathing became rapid and very shallow again now. I reached across the table and placed my large, calloused hand over hers. "Maya, listen to me," I pleaded, my voice filled with genuine paternal love. "You do not have to live like this. You do not have to protect a man who is destroying your future. I have immense resources, Maya. I have money you do not know about. I can hire the best divorce lawyers in the city. I can pay off your overwhelming debts. I can help you pack your bags today and get you far away from him. Let me save you, my beautiful baby girl." For one brief, agonizing second, I saw the truth flash in her eyes. I saw the exhausted, terrified little girl who desperately wanted her father to rescue her from a monster. But then the heavy, invisible chains of Trent's psychological abuse pulled her violently back into the darkness. Maya snatched her hand away from mine as if my touch had burned her skin severely. Her face twisted into a mask of pure denial and irrational anger. "Stop it," she hissed, her voice shaking with misdirected fury. "Just stop it right now, Dad. You are acting completely delusional and insane today." She grabbed her expensive handbag, clutching it against her chest like a protective shield. "Trent warned me this would happen," Maya said, her voice growing louder, drawing the unwanted attention of nearby tables. He told me your cognitive decline was making you paranoid and aggressive. Trent is a good husband. He provides for me. He loves me. You are just making up these horrible lies because you are sick and you are jealous of our incredible success. You are sitting here trying to ruin my perfect marriage with your crazy conspiracy theories." I stared at my daughter, feeling sick now. "Maya," I whispered, heartbroken, "I am trying to protect you. He is using you. He is using me." Maya shook her head violently, tears spilling hot and fast down her cheeks. "You are the one using us," she fired back, repeating Trent's toxic gaslighting word for absolute word. "You are becoming a massive burden to our marriage, Dad. We are constantly stressed because we have to worry about you burning your house down or wandering into busy traffic. Trent is trying to find you a nice, safe nursing home, and you are repaying him by calling him a criminal today." "I am not doing this anymore," Maya said, standing up abruptly from the booth. "I am calling Dr. Evans and scheduling your transfer to the memory care facility immediately. You need serious psychiatric help right now." She turned around to storm out of the restaurant. As she reached out to aggressively push the heavy glass door open, the silk sleeve of her expensive designer blouse slid up her forearm slightly. My heart completely stopped beating. There, on her slender wrist, was a fresh, dark purple bruise in the exact shape of a large hand tightly gripping her delicate skin today. The heavy glass door swung shut behind her, leaving me sitting alone in the upscale bistro. The air left my lungs completely. That ugly violet bruise told me everything I needed to firmly know. Maya was not an accomplice to his financial crimes. She was a deeply traumatized victim suffering from severe physical and emotional abuse. She was viciously protecting her abuser because she was terrified for her life, desperately trying to maintain her country club illusion. I realized then that giving her money would never save her. I had to completely and utterly destroy Trent Sterling forever, absolutely now. I am Leon Banks. I am 72 years old. I sat alone in that upscale bistro long after my daughter Maya walked out the heavy glass doors. The image of that dark purple bruise on her fragile wrist was burned permanently into my mind. It changed everything I thought I knew about the situation. Trent Sterling was not just a white-collar criminal trying to steal my house to pay off his gambling debts. He was a violent monster who was physically abusing my only child. He was using terror to force her into helping him lock me away in a state-funded psychiatric ward. Maya was defending him because she was completely trapped in a nightmare of his creation. Giving her money would never save her from a man who used violence to maintain his control. I realized in that quiet restaurant that I could not simply rescue my daughter by paying off her husband's massive debts. I had to completely and utterly destroy Trent Sterling. I had to dismantle his entire life piece by piece until he had absolutely nothing left. The first step in destroying a parasite is to cut off its food supply. For the past 3 years, I had been keeping a massive financial secret of my own. When Maya and Trent bought their massive, sprawling suburban mansion, they took out a mortgage they could barely afford, even on Trent's former executive salary. But what Trent did not know was that he was not successfully managing the exorbitant property taxes on that massive estate. When my wife Beatrice was still alive, she noticed they were failing to pay their county taxes. To prevent our daughter from losing her home, Beatrice secretly arranged to pay the property tax bills directly from our own pension funds. After Beatrice passed away, I kept making those payments. Every single quarter, a massive sum of my hard-earned retirement money was automatically withdrawn from my bank account to keep the government from seizing Trent's house. He thought he was a successful provider, but he was actually surviving on the charity of the very black man he treated like a senile burden. I walked out of the bistro and got into my 1968 Mustang. The freezing Chicago wind felt bracing and sharp against my face. I drove my car directly to the Cook County Clerk's office downtown. The massive stone building loomed against the gray winter sky, representing the vast, unfeeling bureaucracy of the city. I walked through the heavy revolving doors, feeling a deep sense of absolute determination. I was no longer playing the role of the confused and fragile old man. I walked with the straight spine and confident stride of a master electrician who was about to cut the main power line to Trent's fake empire. I pulled a numbered ticket from the machine and waited patiently in the crowded lobby. When my number was finally called, I walked up to the thick glass window. The clerk was a tired-looking woman surrounded by stacks of legal paperwork. Good afternoon, I said, keeping my voice calm and perfectly steady. I need to file a formal withdrawal of financial responsibility for a residential property. I handed her my identification and the property tax identification numbers for Trent and Maya's suburban estate. The clerk typed the numbers into her computer system and looked at the screen. "Mr. Banks," she said, looking up at me over her glasses, "you have been the primary payer on this property tax account for 36 consecutive months. If you remove your automatic payments today, the current quarter will immediately go into default. The property owners will be notified of the delinquency and the county will begin placing tax liens on the estate within 30 days. Are you absolutely certain you want to detach your name from this liability and cancel all future payments today?" I looked at her without a single trace of hesitation or doubt. "I am completely certain," I replied. "Process the cancellation immediately." The clerk nodded and printed out a thick stack of legal forms. I took the blue pen she offered and signed my name on every single line. With every stroke of the pen, I felt an incredible weight lifting off my shoulders. I was cutting the invisible strings that had kept Trent's arrogant illusion alive. For 3 years, my money had protected him from the consequences of his own financial incompetence. Not anymore. The moment the clerk stamped the final document with a loud, heavy thud, Trent Sterling was officially out of time. His house would fall into default. The county would come collecting. The criminal syndicates he owed money to would close in. The safety net was permanently gone. But cutting off his financial supply was only the first half of my mission that afternoon. I still had the $8,500,000 in the offshore trust that Beatrice had left me. That money was my ultimate weapon, and I needed to make absolutely sure Trent could never touch a single penny of it, even if he managed to successfully forge my signature again. I left the county clerk's office and drove my Mustang toward the financial district in the Loop. I parked near a sleek glass skyscraper that housed the local liaison office for the Cayman Islands wealth management firm. I took the private elevator to the 40th floor. The reception area was immaculate and completely silent. I requested an emergency meeting with the senior trust manager. A tall, distinguished man in a dark tailored suit escorted me into a secure, soundproof conference room overlooking Lake Michigan. "Mr. Banks," he said, shaking my hand firmly, "it is an honor to finally meet you in person. Your late wife Beatrice set up a remarkably secure financial fortress for your family. How can we assist you today?" I sat down in the leather chair and placed my hands on the polished glass table. "I need to move the entire balance of the trust," I explained, my voice filled with cold authority. "I want to transfer the $8,500,000 into a newly established blind trust. And I need this new trust to have the highest level of security your firm can legally provide. I am dealing with a desperate family member who has already attempted to use forged power of attorney documents to access my safe deposit boxes. He is actively planning to commit medical fraud to have me declared mentally incompetent by a judge." The trust manager listened carefully, his expression turning deadly serious. He took out a secure tablet and began taking notes. "We deal with hostile family members and attempted inheritance fraud all the time, Mr. Banks," he assured me. "We can easily structure a new blind trust that completely insulates your assets from any domestic court orders or emergency guardianship decrees. Even if a local judge declares you incompetent and grants your son-in-law full legal control over your life, he will not be able to pierce the corporate veil of the offshore trust. The money will simply not exist on paper within the United States jurisdiction. But we can take the security measures even further if you wish." "That is exactly what I want," I said, leaning forward. "I want to implement a biometric security lock on the new trust. I want it structured so that absolutely no funds can be moved, withdrawn, or liquidated without my direct in-person physical authorization. I do not want the money tied to any written signatures or easily forged passwords." The manager nodded, tapping the screen of his tablet. "We can implement a dual biometric authentication protocol today," he explained. "We will register your fingerprints and a highly detailed retinal scan. Once this protocol is activated, the only way to move the $8,500,000 is for you to physically walk into one of our secure facilities, place your hands on our scanners, and look directly into the retinal camera. A piece of paper signed by a doctor or a judge will be completely worthless. Even if your son-in-law holds a gun to your head, he cannot access the funds without your living, breathing physical cooperation inside a bank vault." "Do it," I commanded. We spent the next 2 hours filling out mountains of highly classified paperwork. The manager brought in specialized equipment to scan my fingerprints. I placed my hands on the glowing glass surface, watching my prints register in their secure database. Next, I leaned into a sophisticated retinal scanner that mapped the unique blood vessels in my eyes. With every security protocol we activated, I felt my power growing. I was locking my wife's massive fortune behind a literal vault of human biology. Trent Sterling could forge all the legal documents he wanted. He could hire corrupt doctors to declare my brain dead. He could lie to the courts and manipulate my terrified daughter. But he could never replicate my fingerprints, and he could never steal my eyes. When the final document was digitally sealed, the manager shook my hand again. "The blind trust is now active, Mr. Banks," he said proudly. "Your assets are locked behind a biometric wall. You are completely bulletproof." I thanked the man and walked out of the towering glass building. The late afternoon sun was beginning to set over the city, casting long, dark shadows across the busy streets. I walked back to my car, feeling a profound sense of absolute readiness. I had cut the financial lifeline that kept Trent's house out of foreclosure. I had secured the millions of dollars Beatrice left me behind impenetrable security. The chessboard was set. The trap was armed and ready to snap shut. I drove the Mustang back to my quiet neighborhood. I pulled into my driveway and turned off the rumbling engine. The house was completely silent. I sat in the driver's seat for a few minutes, letting the stillness of the evening wash over me. I was ready for whatever Trent Sterling was planning to throw at me next. I knew he was desperate. I knew he was violent, but I also knew he was incredibly arrogant, and arrogance always makes men careless. I reached for the door handle to get out of the car when my cell phone suddenly shattered the silence of the cabin. It was vibrating violently against the leather passenger seat. I picked up the phone and looked at the glowing screen. It was Evelyn, my ruthless corporate lawyer and Beatrice's oldest friend. I pressed the answer button and brought the phone to my ear. "Hello, Evelyn," I said, keeping my voice calm and steady. "Are the legal preparations for our defense moving forward as planned today?" There was no greeting on the other end of the line. Evelyn's voice came through the speaker, fast and sharp, carrying a tone of absolute urgency that I had never heard from her before. "Leon," she said, her words clipping together with rapid intensity, "you need to listen to me very carefully right now. Trent just escalated the timeline completely. We thought we had more time to build our case, but he is moving much faster than we anticipated." I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. "What did he do?" "Evelyn," I asked, my heart beginning to pump a steady flow of pure adrenaline into my veins. "Tell me exactly what is happening right now," Leon, Evelyn said, taking a sharp breath. "My clerks just pulled a fresh filing from the county courthouse docket." Trent did not wait. He took the forged cognitive decline evaluation from that corrupt doctor, and he officially filed a petition for emergency legal guardianship over you this afternoon. He is claiming you are an immediate danger to yourself and others. The court accepted the emergency filing, Leon. The judge expedited the hearing. The court hearing to determine your mental competency and strip you of your freedom is in exactly 10 days. I am Leon Banks. I am 72 years old. Evelyn's warning about the 10-day countdown echoed in my mind. Trent had filed for emergency guardianship and needed me to look completely incompetent for the judge. The next morning, my front door unlocked. Trent walked into my kitchen carrying groceries and a sickeningly sweet smile. He announced he was taking over my daily care, claiming Maya was too stressed. He pulled my weekly pill organizer from the cabinet and dumped my prescription bottles onto the counter. He hummed a cheerful tune while sorting my blood pressure medication and joint supplements into the plastic compartments. He handed me a glass of water and the Tuesday dosage. I swallowed them without a second thought, focused on his financial crimes. That was my first, nearly fatal mistake. Within an hour, a thick fog rolled over my brain. My limbs felt filled with wet cement. I tried to stand up from my leather recliner, but my legs buckled beneath me. Trent was sitting on my sofa, watching me intently. He did not rush to help. He watched my eyes glaze over with pure clinical satisfaction. I slurred my words, asking what time it was. He told me it was time to rest. I slept for 14 hours straight. Waking up the next morning, the realization hit me like a physical blow. My blood pressure medication does not cause severe cognitive impairment. My supplements do not induce sudden memory loss and extreme lethargy. Trent was not just building a paper trail of fake medical evaluations. He was chemically manufacturing the symptoms of severe dementia. He was actively poisoning me in my own home. I dragged myself out of bed, splashing freezing water on my face until my mind felt sharp again. I heard the front door open downstairs. Trent was back for his morning routine. I walked into the kitchen, gripping my cane to steady myself. Trent smiled, handing me the Wednesday pills and a glass of water. I took the capsules in my hand and brought the glass to my lips, but I did not swallow the medication. I slipped the capsules under my tongue, took a large gulp of water, and swallowed loudly. I wiped my mouth and thanked him. Trent smiled proudly and turned his back to wipe the counter. The moment his eyes were off me, I spit the damp capsules into a tissue hidden in my cardigan pocket. I spent the next 2 hours playing the role of the heavily sedated old man. I let my chin drop to my chest, staring blankly at the television screen, answering his questions with confused, broken sentences. Trent walked around my house, taking photographs of my valuables and measuring the dimensions of the living room. He was planning the estate sale. Satisfied with my supposed catatonic state, he locked the front door and drove away. The second his oversized luxury vehicle disappeared down the street, I stood up perfectly straight. I pulled the damp tissue from my pocket, inspecting the capsules. One had been carefully pulled apart and resealed. The white powder inside was slightly clumped and unfamiliar. I grabbed my car keys, driving straight to an independent toxicology laboratory in the northern suburbs. Evelyn gave me the address of this discreet facility catering to high-profile clients who needed off-the-record testing. I walked up to the white counter, placing the capsules in an evidence bag. I handed the technician $800 in cash, demanding a comprehensive chemical breakdown within 4 hours. I sat in my Mustang in the parking lot, refusing to leave until I had the truth. When the technician called me back inside, he looked extremely disturbed. He handed me a sealed envelope containing the detailed laboratory report. "Mr. Banks," he said, his voice tight with concern, "the primary pill is a standard beta blocker for hypertension, but someone manually emptied half the capsule, replacing it with a massive concentrated dose of strong sedatives." He listed the chemical names, explaining they were heavy central nervous system depressants. In a man your age, this dosage causes immediate profound confusion, slurred speech, loss of motor control, and severe memory blackouts. Taken consistently over 10 days, it induces a state indistinguishable from advanced dementia. Combined with certain foods, it could easily cause a fatal respiratory arrest. I took the envelope and thanked the man. I walked back to my car, my blood running ice cold. Trent Sterling was not just trying to steal my house. He was meticulously orchestrating a slow chemical execution. If he killed me outright, there would be a police investigation and an autopsy. But if an old man with documented severe cognitive decline simply forgot to breathe in his sleep, the coroner would call it natural causes. Trent would inherit the estate free and clear, leaving Maya none the wiser. He was a cold-blooded psychopath, but he made one massive, fatal miscalculation. He challenged a master electrician inside his own grid. I drove to a specialized electronics supply store downtown. Passing the standard security cameras, I went straight to the covert surveillance section. I purchased 4 high-definition wireless microcameras, each no larger than a nail head. I bought an encrypted digital video recorder and 50 feet of hair-thin copper wiring. Returning to my house, I immediately went to work. I pulled my heavy wooden stepladder into the kitchen. My hands moved with absolute practiced precision. I unscrewed the plastic casing of the ceiling smoke detector. I spliced the tiny camera wire directly into the continuous electrical feed so it would never run out of battery power. I positioned the microscopic lens to point straight down at the kitchen island where Trent prepared my food. I installed the second camera seamlessly into the wooden trim underneath the upper cabinets, providing a perfect eye-level view of the countertop. I wired the third camera into the living room air vent and the fourth into the hallway fixture. I ran all feeds into a hidden receiver bolted securely behind the drywall in my utility closet, connecting the encrypted live feed directly to my smartphone. The resolution was flawless, crystal clear 4K video capturing every millimeter of my kitchen. The trap was armed. The absolute destruction of Trent Sterling was no longer a legal strategy but a digital certainty. I spent the evening testing the angles and ensuring the audio recording parameters were perfectly calibrated. I could hear a pin drop across the room. The following afternoon, the front door unlocked right on schedule. Trent walked in, whistling a cheerful melody. He found me sitting in my leather recliner, staring blankly out the window, playing my part to perfection. "Hello, Leon," he said loudly, projecting his fake, caring voice. "I brought you some nice hot chicken soup today, keeping your strength up for the court hearing next week." He patted me roughly on the shoulder and walked straight into the kitchen out of my direct line of sight. I did not turn my head. I simply reached into my pocket, pulling out my smartphone, keeping it hidden below the armrest. I opened the encrypted application, watching the live high-definition video feed. I saw Trent place a bowl of soup on the kitchen island. I watched him look over his shoulder toward the living room, making absolutely sure I was not watching him. Then he reached into his expensive tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a small, clear plastic vial filled with crushed white powder. The microscopic lens under the cabinet captured the entire sequence in perfect, undeniable clarity. Trent unscrewed the cap of the vial, dumping the heavy sedatives directly into my bowl of hot soup. He picked up a silver spoon, stirring the poisonous mixture thoroughly until the powder completely dissolved into the broth. Then he leaned his face close to the bowl, his arrogant mouth curling into a sinister, triumphant smile. The hidden microphone in the smoke detector picked up his voice with terrifying perfection. "Sleep tight, old man," he whispered to the empty kitchen. "Your house belongs to me now." He picked up the tray and turned back toward the living room. I quickly slipped my phone back into my pocket, staring blankly at the wall as he approached. He placed the poisoned soup in front of me, urging me to eat every last drop. I nodded weakly, pretending to lift the spoon. I knew exactly what I had to do next. The evidence was secured and stored safely in the cloud. Trent had handed me the ultimate proof of his murderous intentions. I could now involve the authorities with unshakable evidence that no highly paid lawyer could ever refute. The countdown to his absolute ruin was ticking faster than ever. I am Leon Banks. I am 72 years old. I sat in my quiet kitchen staring at my smartphone screen. I watched the crystal-clear 4K video replay over and over again. My son-in-law Trent was standing at my kitchen island, pouring a massive dose of heavy central nervous system depressants into my hot chicken soup. "Sleep tight, old man," he had whispered to the empty room. He smiled like a demon who had just won a grand prize. He thought he was watching me fade away into a permanent fog. I did not eat a single drop of that poisoned soup. I dumped it down the drain and washed the bowl thoroughly. Then I put my coat on, grabbed my keys, and drove straight downtown to see Evelyn. When I walked into Evelyn's corner office at Vanguard and Associates, I did not say a single word. I simply placed the toxicological laboratory report and my smartphone on her polished mahogany desk. I pressed play on the video. Evelyn watched the horrifying footage in absolute silence. Her jaw tightened and her dark eyes grew incredibly cold and sharp. "This is no longer just elder abuse, Leon," she said, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "This is attempted murder, and we have him dead to rights." I nodded slowly, feeling the cold, hard weight of justice settling into my bones. Evelyn picked up her desk phone and bypassed the local police department entirely. She called the district attorney and a high-level contact she had at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Trent had made a catastrophic legal mistake. When he used Maya's stolen identity to secure high-interest loans, and when he forged those bank documents to transfer my house to a shell company, he crossed state lines electronically. That specific action made his financial crimes a major federal offense. Combined with the undeniable video evidence of him chemically poisoning a senior citizen, the authorities were absolutely ready to move with overwhelming force against him. We spent the next 4 hours in a secure conference room with 2 plainclothes federal agents and an assistant district attorney. They carefully reviewed the offshore bank statements, the forged power of attorney, the laboratory results, and the hidden camera footage. The federal agents were stunned by the sheer magnitude of Trent's arrogance and his violent desperation. The ultimate legal trap was finally set. The federal agents wanted to arrest him immediately, but Evelyn stopped them. "We wait," she told the agents, her voice filled with absolute authority. "Trent is a massive narcissist. He desperately wants to win publicly. If we arrest him now, he will play the innocent victim and drag Maya down into the mud with him. We need to catch him in the exact moment he attempts to steal the physical property. We need to let him walk directly into his own public execution." The agents quickly agreed to her plan. They would monitor his every move and wait patiently for my final signal. I drove back to my house feeling like a general surveying a battlefield. The next morning, my cell phone rang. It was Maya. Her voice sounded painfully artificial, like she was reading from a script. "Hi, Dad," she said, trying to force a cheerful tone. "Trent and I are hosting a family barbecue at our house this Saturday. We invited Trent's parents and our wealthy friends. We really want you to be there." I gripped the phone tightly, knowing Trent was probably standing right next to her listening. "Why a barbecue, Maya?" I asked, making my voice sound weak and confused. "It is just a nice celebration, Dad," she replied, her voice cracking slightly. "Trent says it is a perfect way to celebrate you before you transition to the care facility next week. He wants everyone to see how much we love you and care about your future. I closed my eyes, feeling a surge of pure protective rage for my daughter. Trent was forcing her to participate in a grotesque theatrical performance. He wanted to parade me around in front of his wealthy friends and his parents as a pathetic, broken old man. He wanted to look like the generous savior of the family while he was actively poisoning my food and attempting to steal my home. "I will be there, Maya," I said softly, playing my part. "I would not miss it for the world." I hung up the phone and stared at the wall. The barbecue was not a loving family celebration. It was a staged execution of my independence. The countdown to his destruction began right then. I spent the next 2 days acting like a heavily sedated zombie whenever Trent came over to check on me. I let him confidently think his poisoned pills were working perfectly on my brain. I stumbled around the dark house, slurring my words and staring blankly at the floorboards. He would smile that sick, triumphant smile and pat my shoulder roughly. He was completely unaware that the federal government was now closely monitoring his bank accounts, his phone calls, and his daily emails. On Thursday evening, just 2 days before the big barbecue, my phone buzzed with a highly encrypted message from Evelyn. I called her immediately from my secure, untraceable line. "Leon," she said, her voice buzzing with intense anticipation. "My private investigators just intercepted a highly suspicious financial transaction. Trent just wired $10,000 to a man named Arthur Vance." I quickly asked her who that man was. Evelyn let out a bitter laugh. "Arthur Vance is a disgraced public notary who lost his license 5 years ago for participating in massive real estate fraud," she explained. "He operates in the criminal shadows, authenticating forged documents for desperate people." I asked Evelyn why Trent would need a corrupt notary right now. Evelyn paused. "Leon," she said, "he hired Vance to be at the barbecue this Saturday. He is going to pose as a friendly family guest. Trent is setting an elaborate stage. He plans to wait until the party is full of guests. He expects you to be fully incapacitated by the strong sedatives. He is going to pull out the deed to your house and physically force you to sign it. He will frame it as a loving family transition, telling the crowd that you are willingly surrendering your property. And Vance will illegally notarize the fake signature right in front of dozens of oblivious clapping witnesses." Trent wanted a captive audience. He wanted loud applause while he robbed me blind. He wanted Maya to watch him conquer her father. He thought the public setting would prevent me from fighting back. He wanted to thoroughly humiliate me before he legally destroyed me. I spent Friday night finalizing the mechanical details of our counterattack. I took the black flash drive that Beatrice had hidden in the safe deposit box and transferred the audio recordings onto a secure cloud server that Evelyn controlled. I made sure the video of Trent poisoning my chicken soup was queued up on my smartphone, ready to be cast to any smart television. I called Evelyn to confirm our strategic positioning for the ambush. The plan was flawlessly designed. Evelyn and the federal agents would be parked in an unmarked van 2 blocks away from Trent's suburban house. They would monitor a live audio feed from a hidden microphone taped securely under my shirt collar. The moment Trent presented the fraudulent property deed and attempted to force my signature, the federal agents would deploy and raid the premises. They were bringing local police cruisers to completely block the streets, ensuring Trent had no avenue of escape. I hung up the phone and laid out my charcoal suit on the bed. I did not sleep a wink that night. I was fueled by the icy anticipation of pure vengeance. I walked into my bedroom and looked at myself closely in the tall mirror. I was not weak. I was not confused. I was a strong 72-year-old master electrician who had survived decades of hard physical labor in the brutal city of Chicago. I had built a magnificent empire with my late wife Beatrice, and I was currently sitting on $8.5 million of untouchable offshore wealth. Trent Sterling wanted a public spectacle. He wanted a dramatic show in front of all his country club friends. I decided right then and there that I would give him exactly what he wanted. I would give him the greatest show of his miserable life. I would let him gather his friends and family. I would let him pull out his forged documents, and then I would burn his entire world to the ground. I would make sure he lost absolutely everything he had. I would ensure he never hurt Maya ever again. The ultimate trap was fully prepared, and Trent was walking straight into it. I am Leon Banks. I am 72 years old. Saturday morning arrived with a bright and unforgiving sun. It was the day of the grand suburban barbecue at my son-in-law Trent's house. I stood in my bedroom adjusting the collar of my shirt. Taped securely beneath the fabric right against my collarbone was a high-definition wireless microphone. 2 blocks away from Trent's sprawling estate, Evelyn and a team of federal agents were sitting in an unmarked surveillance van, listening to every single breath I took. I grabbed my wooden cane and walked out the front door. I did not drive my classic Mustang today. A man suffering from severe cognitive decline does not drive a high-performance vintage muscle car. Instead, I called a local taxi service. I needed to arrive looking entirely dependent and completely helpless. I sat in the back of the cab watching the familiar streets of Chicago fade into the manicured, affluent neighborhoods of the northern suburbs. Trent's neighborhood was a monument to fake wealth. The houses were massive, towering structures of stone and glass built far too close together. Every driveway was filled with leased luxury vehicles and heavily financed sports cars. The taxi pulled up to Trent's house. It was a sprawling estate with perfectly cut grass and a massive iron front door. I paid the driver in cash and stepped out onto the pristine concrete driveway. I hunched my shoulders forward, dropping my chin toward my chest. I let my hands develop a slight, constant tremor. I gripped my wooden cane tightly, shuffling my feet slowly across the pavement. The master electrician vanished completely. The helpless, senile old man took the stage. As I approached the large wooden gate leading to the backyard, I could hear the loud, arrogant laughter of Trent's wealthy friends. The smell of expensive grilled meats and heavy floral perfumes filled the warm afternoon air. I pushed the gate open and stepped into the crowded backyard. The space was enormous, featuring a massive heated swimming pool, an outdoor kitchen, and dozens of guests dressed in high-end designer casual wear. They were drinking expensive champagne and eating catered food, all paid for by credit cards taken out in my daughter's stolen name. I scanned the crowd and immediately spotted my daughter, Maya. She was standing near the outdoor bar wearing a long, flowing summer dress. She held a crystal glass in her hand, but she was not drinking. Her eyes looked completely exhausted and deeply terrified. She had applied a thick layer of expensive foundation to her face and arms to hide the dark purple bruises her husband had given her. She looked like a prisoner trapped inside a golden cage. My heart broke looking at her, but I forced my face to remain completely blank and confused. Then I saw him. Trent Sterling was standing by the edge of the pool holding court with a group of men in pastel polo shirts. He was laughing loudly, holding a silver grilling spatula like a royal scepter. He looked like the absolute king of the castle. He was completely unaware that his entire financial empire was currently burning to the ground and that the federal government was listening to his every word. Before Trent noticed my arrival, I was intercepted by 2 people I despised almost as much as him. Trent's parents, Richard and Margaret Sterling. They were standing near the patio furniture holding matching glasses of white wine. Richard was a retired corporate executive who lost most of his money in bad investments but still carried himself like a billionaire. Margaret was a thin, sharp-featured woman who looked at the world with permanent disdain. They were the ones who taught Trent his unparalleled arrogance. Margaret spotted me shuffling toward the patio. She did not walk over to greet me. She simply leaned toward her group of country club friends, making sure her voice was just loud enough for me to hear. "Oh, look," Margaret said, letting out a loud, theatrical sigh. "It is Maya's poor father. It is so incredibly sad how fast the mind goes. He does not even know where he is half the time. Trent is such a saint for taking on this heavy burden." Richard nodded, taking a slow sip of his wine. "Trent has a heart of gold," Richard agreed loudly. "Most men would have thrown the old guy into a state facility months ago, but Trent insists on managing the transition personally. It takes a massive toll on my boy, but he does it out of pure charity." I stood there leaning heavily on my cane, listening to them praise their criminal son. I wanted to stand up straight, look Richard dead in the eye, and tell him that his son was a broke, desperate fraud facing federal prison. I wanted to tell Margaret that her saint of a son was actively poisoning a senior citizen and physically abusing my daughter. But I held my tongue. I let my mouth hang open slightly. I stared blankly at the patio stones playing the part of the broken man. Let them talk. Let them build him up as a hero. The higher they placed him on his pedestal, the harder the fall was going to be. Trent finally noticed me standing near the patio. He excused himself from his group of friends and walked over with a massive fake smile plastered across his face. "Hello, Leon Trent," said his voice booming so the entire party could hear him. "I am so glad you could make it today. We were starting to worry you might have forgotten the address again." Several guests chuckled softly at his cruel joke. Maya hurried over from the bar, her eyes filled with panic. "Hi, Dad," she said softly, kissing my cheek. "Are you feeling okay today?" I looked at her with wide, confused eyes. "I am fine, Maya," I mumbled, making my voice sound shaky and raspy. "There are so many people here today. Who are all these people?" Trent placed a heavy hand on my shoulder, squeezing it just a little too hard. "They are our friends, Leon," Trent announced loudly. "They are all here to support you during this difficult time. Why do you not come sit down in the shade?" Trent guided me to a plush wicker chair positioned strategically near the center of the patio. It was the focal point of the entire backyard. He wanted everyone to have a clear view of my supposed deterioration. I sat down heavily, letting my cane fall to the ground with a loud clatter. Maya quickly picked it up for me, her hands shaking. Trent looked at me with cold, calculating eyes. "You look a little bit parched, Leon," Trent said, his voice dripping with fake concern. "It is a hot day. Let me get you something special to drink to calm your nerves. I will be right back. Do not wander off now." I watched Trent walk over to the outdoor kitchen. He did not go to the main bar where the bartender was mixing drinks. He went to a small private cooler tucked under the counter. He pulled out a pre-poured glass of yellow lemonade. He turned his back to the crowd for just a second. I knew exactly what he was doing. He was adding another massive dose of heavy sedatives to the drink. He wanted me completely compliant and mentally paralyzed for the grand finale of his show. Trent walked back over to my chair, handing me the sweating glass of lemonade. "Drink up, Leon." Trent commanded, his voice carrying a subtle, undeniable threat. "It will make you feel so much better." I took the glass with trembling hands. I looked up at him, offering a weak, confused smile. "Thank you, Trent," I muttered. "You are a very good boy." Trent smirked, satisfied that his poison was about to take effect. He turned around to greet another group of arriving guests, leaving me alone in the chair. I held the cold glass in my hands, calculating my next move. I could not drink the poisoned liquid, but I could not simply leave it on the table either. Trent would notice and force me to consume it. I needed to dispose of the evidence right in front of everyone without raising a single suspicion. I looked to my left. Right next to my wicker chair sat a massive decorative ceramic pot holding a tall, leafy plant. The soil was dark and dry. I waited for the perfect moment. Maya was distracted by Trent's mother. Trent was busy shaking hands with a man I immediately recognized as Arthur Vance, the corrupt public notary. The guests were all laughing and talking, completely ignoring the senile old man in the corner. I let my hand holding the glass tremble violently. I tilted my wrist just enough to let the yellow liquid spill out in a steady, silent stream directly into the dry soil of the potted plant. The dirt absorbed the poisoned lemonade instantly, leaving no trace behind. I kept a small amount of liquid at the bottom of the glass. When Trent glanced back in my direction a few minutes later, I raised the nearly empty glass to my lips, pretending to swallow the final drops. I wiped my mouth with the back of my hand and let my head loll back against the chair, closing my eyes. Trent saw the empty glass and a look of pure, absolute triumph washed over his face. He thought he had won. He thought the heavy central nervous system depressants were racing through my bloodstream, preparing to shut down my cognitive functions completely. I kept my eyes closed, listening to the sounds of the party swirling around me. I focused on the tiny microphone taped to my chest. I knew Evelyn and the federal agents were listening closely, waiting for the exact moment the criminal transaction began. I slowed my breathing, playing the part of the heavily sedated victim. Arthur Vance, the disgraced notary, walked past my chair carrying a leather briefcase. He exchanged a quick, quiet word with Trent. The trap was fully set. Trent had his audience, he had his corrupt official, he had his forged legal documents ready to be signed. He was just waiting for the poison to take full effect. I sat in that wicker chair for 30 long, agonizing minutes, pretending to be completely dead to the world. Maya came over twice to check on me, her voice tight with unshed tears. "Dad," she whispered softly, touching my arm. "Please wake up. Please be okay." I wanted so desperately to open my eyes and tell her everything was going to be fine, but I could not break character. I let out a soft, confused groan and let my head drop forward. Maya sobbed quietly and walked away, unable to watch her father deteriorate. She had no idea I was sharper and more alert than I had ever been in my entire life. I was a coiled spring, waiting for the perfect moment to release. The afternoon sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting long, dark shadows across the pristine swimming pool. The party had reached its peak. The guests had consumed enough expensive alcohol to be loud and attentive. Trent knew it was time. I heard his heavy footsteps approaching my chair. He grabbed my shoulder and shook me roughly. "Wake up, Leon!" Trent hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "It is time for you to give me what I want." I opened my eyes, slowly blinking as if fighting through a dense chemical fog. I looked up at him, letting my jaw hang slack. "Where am I?" I mumbled, slurring my words perfectly. Trent grinned, showing all his teeth. "You are exactly where you belong, old man. Now sit up straight and do exactly what I tell you to do." Trent stepped away from my chair and walked to the center of the patio, right next to the shimmering blue pool. He grabbed a silver spoon and a crystal champagne flute. The sound of metal striking glass cut through the loud chatter of the party. The guests slowly stopped talking, turning their attention to the host. Trent clinked his glass again, ensuring he had the absolute undivided attention of every single person in the backyard. The music faded out. Maya stood frozen near the outdoor kitchen, clutching her arms around her stomach. Trent's arrogant parents, Richard and Margaret, stepped forward, smiling proudly at their son. Arthur Vance stood discreetly near a patio table, opening his leather briefcase and pulling out a thick stack of official-looking legal documents. The federal agents sitting in the surveillance van 2 blocks away were undoubtedly gripping their steering wheels, waiting for my final signal. I kept my head down, looking at my trembling hands, breathing slowly and deeply. Trent raised his champagne flute high into the air. His voice was loud, confident, and dripping with fake emotional sincerity. "Everyone, please gather around, Trent," commanded, smiling warmly at his wealthy friends. "Thank you all so much for coming today. As you know, my family has been going through an incredibly difficult transition lately. My father-in-law, Leon, has been struggling with severe cognitive decline. It has been a painful journey for my beautiful wife, Maya, and for me. We love him dearly, but we know he can no longer manage his massive estate on his own. He needs specialized full-time medical care to keep him safe." Trent paused, letting the crowd murmur with sympathetic approval. Margaret wiped a fake tear from her eye. Richard nodded solemnly. Trent lowered his glass and pointed directly at me, sitting slumped in the wicker chair. "But today is a day of love and family unity," Trent continued, his voice echoing across the silent patio. "Leon has made a very brave and very beautiful decision today. He wants to ensure his legacy is protected, and he wants to relieve his daughter of this heavy, terrible burden. Everyone, please gather close. Leon has a special announcement to make about his future and a very important document to sign for us today. I am Leon Arthur Banks. I am exactly 72 years old." Trent stood in the center of the crowded outdoor patio, holding his crystal champagne flute high in the air. The afternoon sun beat down on the wealthy guests who had gathered around the expensive swimming pool. They all stared at me with varying expressions of pity and morbid curiosity. Trent lowered his glass and walked over to my wicker chair. He reached out and grabbed me by the upper arm, his grip tight and painful. His fingers dug into my flesh with the desperate strength of a man who needed this performance to go absolutely perfectly. "Come on, Leon," Trent said, his voice dripping with loud theatrical sympathy. "Let us go inside to the living room where it is cool and quiet. Everyone, please follow us inside so Leon can share his big news." I let my body go completely limp, leaning my entire weight against my wooden cane. I shuffled my feet, dragging my leather shoes across the expensive stone patio. I kept my head bowed, letting my jaw hang open, playing the role of the heavily sedated victim. Trent practically dragged me through the heavy glass sliding doors and into his massive, sprawling living room. The guests filed in behind us, crowding the large room shoulder to shoulder. They held their expensive drinks and whispered to one another, completely captivated by the tragic family spectacle. Trent guided me toward the center of the room. A large glass coffee table sat in front of a white leather sectional sofa. Standing right next to the table was Arthur Vance, the disgraced public notary. He wore a cheap gray suit and held a thick stack of legal documents. He looked nervous, sweating slightly under the bright recessed lighting of the living room. Vance opened his leather briefcase and arranged the papers neatly on the glass table. Trent pushed me down onto the white leather sofa. I sank into the cushions, letting my cane slide to the floor with a loud clatter. Maya stood in the corner of the room near the grand staircase. She had her arms wrapped tightly around her stomach. She looked absolutely terrified. Her eyes were red and swollen from crying quietly. She refused to look at me. My heart broke for her, but I knew I had to remain perfectly in character for just a few more minutes. The trap was almost ready to snap shut. Richard and Margaret Sterling. Trent's arrogant parents pushed their way to the front of the crowd. They stood right next to the coffee table, looking down at me with sheer pity and disguised disgust. "It is just so heartbreaking," Margaret whispered loudly to a woman standing next to her. "His mind is completely gone. He does not even recognize his own daughter anymore. Trent is an absolute saint for taking on this heavy legal burden. Trent is doing the right thing. He is securing the estate and ensuring the old man gets the professional medical care he desperately needs." I sat there listening to them praise their criminal son. My blood boiled, but I kept my face totally blank. I let my eyes wander aimlessly around the room. I could feel the tiny wireless microphone taped securely against my collarbone beneath my shirt. Evelyn and the federal agents were sitting in the surveillance van just 2 blocks away, listening to every single word being spoken in this living room. They were waiting for the exact moment Trent committed the physical act of fraud. Trent stood right in front of the glass table. He smiled at his wealthy guests and cleared his throat. "Thank you all for being here today," Trent announced, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "As you know, Leon has been struggling with severe cognitive decline. We have consulted with top doctors, and unfortunately his condition is deteriorating rapidly. It is no longer safe for him to live alone in his large house. Maya and I have made the incredibly difficult decision to transition him to a full-time memory care facility next week where he can receive round-the-clock supervision." The guests murmured with sympathetic approval. Trent raised his hands to quiet the room. "But Leon is a proud man," Trent continued, lying through his teeth with flawless execution. "He wants to ensure his legacy is protected. He wants to relieve Maya and me of the overwhelming financial stress of managing his estate. So today he is voluntarily signing his property over to a family trust that I will personally manage. This will allow us to pay for his medical care and protect his assets from being seized by the state." It was a masterful performance. He sounded like a grieving, heroic son-in-law. He painted himself as a selfless protector. But I knew the absolute truth. I knew he was weeks away from having his legs broken by illegal loan sharks. I knew he was going to sell my home to a shell company the very next day. I knew he had poisoned my food and physically abused my daughter. Trent turned around and looked down at me. He picked up a solid gold pen from the glass table. He picked up the thick stack of legal documents. They were the forged property deeds transferring total ownership of my $800,000 home directly to him. He stepped closer to the sofa. He leaned down and forced the gold pen into my trembling hand. "It is time," Pop Trent said, his voice low and firm. "Sign the house over to the trust so I can take care of you. The notary is right here. He will make it all official. Just sign your name on the dotted line." I looked down at the heavy gold pen in my hand. I let my fingers shake violently. I dropped the pen onto the glass table, making it clatter loudly against the surface. I looked up at Trent with wide, terrified eyes, playing the confused old man one last time. "I do not know how to sign." I whispered, my voice raspy and weak. "My hands do not work right anymore." Trent clenched his jaw. A flash of pure, violent anger crossed his face, but he quickly masked it for the crowd. He picked the pen back up and grabbed my right hand. He wrapped my fingers around the gold medal, squeezing my knuckles tightly. "I will help you, Leon," Trent said through gritted teeth. "Just hold the pen. I will guide your hand. We are doing this together." I looked past Trent. I looked at his mother, Margaret, who was smiling patronizingly at me. I looked at his father, Richard, who was nodding with arrogant approval. I looked at Arthur Vance, the corrupt notary who was holding his stamp ready to authenticate a forced signature. And then I looked at Maya. My beautiful daughter was standing by the stairs, crying silently, unable to make eye contact with me. She thought she was watching her father lose everything. I turned my gaze back to Trent. He was leaning over me, his face just inches from mine. I smelled the expensive cologne he bought with my stolen money. I saw the greedy desperation shining in his eyes. He thought he had won. He thought the heavy sedatives he poured into my lemonade were shutting down my brain. He thought I was entirely powerless. I stopped trembling. I let my hand go completely still. I loosened my grip on the gold pen, letting it fall from my fingers, and hit the glass table with a sharp final click. I took a deep breath, pulling the cool air into my lungs. I felt the decades of hard manual labor, the years of building an empire with Beatrice, and the absolute certainty of justice surging through my veins. I looked Trent directly in the eyes. I did not blink. I let the weak, confused old man die right there on the white leather sofa. I let the master electrician take full control. I pushed myself up from the sofa. I did not grab my wooden cane. I did not stumble. I stood up perfectly straight, towering over Trent. My spine was rigid. The sudden physical transformation sent a shockwave through the crowded living room. The sympathetic murmurs instantly died. The room fell into a dead silence. Trent stumbled backward, his eyes widening in pure shock. He looked at me as if a ghost had just risen from the grave. "Leon," he stammered, his voice losing all its theatrical confidence. "What are you doing? Sit back down. You are confused." I stared down at him. My face was a mask of cold, unyielding stone. My voice did not shake. It boomed through the massive living room with the heavy, undeniable authority of a man who owned the ground he stood on. "I am not signing a damn thing. Trent, I am Leon Banks. I am 72 years old." The massive living room went dead silent, the heavy, sudden silence that rings in your ears. Dozens of wealthy guests holding expensive crystal champagne flutes froze in place. Nobody took a breath. The sound of ice clinking in a glass sounded like a gunshot echoing off the high vaulted ceilings. Trent stood inches away from me. The arrogant, triumphant smile completely melted off his face, leaving behind a pale, sweating mask of pure, unadulterated panic. His eyes darted around the crowded room, quickly realizing that his perfect theatrical performance was rapidly falling apart. He looked down at my hands, fully expecting them to be shaking with weakness. They were perfectly still, resting comfortably at my sides. He looked at my posture, expecting me to be hunched over in defeat. I was standing significantly taller than him, my spine straight. Trent swallowed hard, stepping forward, trying to intentionally block me from the view of his elite friends. He reached out rapidly and grabbed my right arm. His grip was incredibly desperate. His fingernails dug deeply into the fabric of my tailored charcoal suit. "Sit down, Leon," Trent hissed. His voice was a low, venomous whisper, meant only for my ears. "Stop making a scene right now. You are highly confused. The medication is making you act completely crazy. Sit down and sign the legal papers before you embarrass Maya in front of everyone we know." He tried to physically force me back down onto the white leather sofa, using his body weight to push me. He thought my muscles were weak and useless. He thought 40 years of pulling thick, heavy copper wire through commercial concrete buildings had left me frail and defenseless. He was absolutely wrong. My body remembered every single day of brutal physical labor. I did not flinch. I did not step back. I raised my left arm and slapped Trent's hand away from my body, hitting his wrist with the calloused strength of a master electrician. The sharp, physical smack echoed through the living room. Trent gasped loudly in genuine pain, stumbling backward. He looked at me with absolute terror shining in his wide eyes. "Do not ever put your hands on me again," I said. My voice was loud, deep, and clear, carrying to every single hidden corner of the massive house. "I am not confused. Trent, I am not crazy. I am sharper than I have been in 20 long years, and you are a broke, desperate fraud." The gathered guests gasped collectively, taking a synchronized step backward. Margaret and Richard Sterling stepped away from the coffee table, their faces turning crimson. Arthur Vance, the corrupt notary, tried to quietly slide the forged documents back into his briefcase. "Leave those papers exactly where they are, Arthur," I commanded, pointing a steady accusatory finger directly at the disgraced official I know. "Exactly who you are. I know you lost your official notary license 5 years ago for orchestrating a real estate fraud scheme. I know Trent paid you $10,000 to illegally authenticate my forged signature today." Arthur completely froze, his shaking hands hovering uselessly over the glass coffee table. The crowd began to murmur loudly. People exchanged shocked, worried glances, setting their drinks down and stepping away from the center of the room. Trent was breathing heavily, his chest heaving aggressively under his custom-tailored shirt. He looked exactly like a trapped wild animal realizing the cage had slammed shut. "Leon, please," Trent begged, raising both his hands in a pathetic, trembling gesture of surrender. "You are hallucinating. You are having a severe paranoid episode. We just want to help you get the medical care you need. Someone call Dr. Evans," Trent shouted desperately to the crowd, looking for any kind of support. "He needs emergency medical sedation right now. He is a danger to himself." I laughed out loud. It was a deep, cold sound that vibrated with absolute, undeniable authority. "Dr. Evans is not coming to save you today." "Trent," I said, taking a slow, deliberate, intimidating step toward him. "Dr. Evans is currently being investigated by the federal government for committing medical malpractice and writing fraudulent cognitive decline evaluations. just like the completely fake one you paid him a vast sum of money to write for me. Trent's face turned an ugly, sickly shade of gray. He looked over at Maya, who was standing frozen in terror by the bottom of the grand wooden staircase. "Maya, do something," Trent pleaded, his voice cracking with intense desperation. "Tell all our friends your father is deeply sick. Tell them he is losing his mind and needs to be locked away." Maya looked at her sweating husband. She looked at the dark purple bruise on her own wrist, the one he had given her. Then she looked directly at me. I gave my beautiful daughter a warm, encouraging nod. Maya took a deep, shaky breath. She stood up, perfectly straight, and she shook her head firmly. "No, Trent," Maya said, her voice surprisingly steady and strong. "He is not sick, and I am not covering for your violent financial lies anymore." The entire living room erupted into loud, shocked whispers. Trent was rapidly losing control of his carefully crafted narrative. He was permanently losing his greedy grip on the house he desperately needed to steal to save his life. He tried one last, desperate, frantic maneuver. The lemonade. Trent stammered, pointing a shaking, sweaty finger at the empty glass sitting on the patio table outside. "You drank the yellow lemonade. You should be sleeping. You should be completely sedated." I smiled at him. It was the cold, calculating smile of an older man who had already won the total war. "I poured your poisoned lemonade directly into the potted plant on the patio." "Trent," I explained, speaking loud enough for the hidden federal microphone under my shirt to pick up every syllable, just like I secretly spit out the toxic capsules you aggressively tried to force down my throat all week. I took those specific capsules to an independent private toxicology laboratory. I know you manually emptied my standard blood pressure medication and maliciously replaced it with heavy central nervous system depressants. I know you were intentionally trying to chemically induce the severe symptoms of dementia. You were actively trying to chemically execute my independence so you could steal my real estate." Margaret Sterling let out a loud shriek, covering her mouth with both her hands. Richard Sterling grabbed his wife's arm frantically, looking around the crowded room, searching for an immediate escape route. The wealthy guests were now pulling out their expensive smartphones, pointing the camera lenses directly at Trent's sweating face. They were eagerly recording every miserable second of his spectacular public downfall. Trent backed away quickly until his shoulders hit the hard edge of the large stone fireplace. "This is a total lie," he screamed, his voice high-pitched and incredibly frantic. "You have absolutely no proof of any of this nonsense. You are an insane, bitter old man making up wild fictional stories to ruin my flawless reputation. You have absolutely no solid proof." I reached slowly into the inner pocket of my charcoal suit jacket. I did not pull out a physical weapon. I pulled out my own smartphone and a small black plastic remote control. I held both the devices high up into the air for everyone in the room to clearly see. "You are right about one thing, Trent," I said, my voice dropping to a deadly calm and chilling register. "You built a nice house here. You spared no expense outfitting this living room with the best technology available, including that massive 85-inch smart television hanging right above your head." Trent looked up slowly at the blank black screen of the television and then looked back down at me. Pure, unadulterated dread washed entirely over his pale features. He finally realized the immense magnitude of the trap he had confidently walked into. I pressed a single button on my smartphone, quickly linking it to the local wireless network. Then I pointed the small black remote directly at the massive television and pressed the power button. The giant screen flashed to life, instantly illuminating the dark living room with a bright, blinding digital glare. I hit the play button on my smartphone screen. The massive television did not show a happy family slideshow or a weekend sports game. It played the high-definition security footage directly from the First National Bank vault. The video clearly showed Trent Sterling sweating and frantically standing at the branch manager's desk. It showed him slamming the forged power of attorney papers onto the hard counter, aggressively demanding that they illegally drill into my late wife Beatrice's safe deposit box. The visual evidence was completely undeniable. The entire room erupted loudly as the horrified guests gasped in collective absolute horror. "I am Leon Banks, and I am 72 years old." Trent turned completely ghost white as the bank security footage played on the massive television screen. The arrogant smirk that had lived on his face for the last 5 years melted away into pure, unadulterated terror. He stumbled backward away from the glass coffee table, his expensive leather shoes slipping awkwardly on the pristine hardwood floor. He raised both of his shaking hands, desperately trying to shield his face from the glaring digital light of the screen. "Turn that off!" he shouted wildly, his voice breaking with sheer panic. "He is completely crazy!" Trent yelled, turning his frantic eyes toward the crowd of wealthy guests. "He is a sick old man making up total lies. He must have hacked the system to fabricate that video. Do not look at it." I stood perfectly still in the center of the living room, holding the black plastic remote control securely in my right hand. The guests did not look away from the giant screen. They watched in absolute stunned silence as the silent security footage clearly showed Trent aggressively slamming the forged legal documents down onto the bank manager's front desk. "You cannot hide from the truth anymore, Trent," I said, my voice booming across the spacious living room with undeniable authority. I pressed a single button on my smartphone, quickly changing the digital video feed. The massive screen flickered black for a brief second before a new video began to play. This footage was not silent and it was not grainy. It was crystal clear 4K resolution, capturing every single corner of my own private kitchen back home. The hidden micro camera I installed inside the ceiling smoke detector provided a perfect unobstructed view of the kitchen island area. The guests gasped collectively as the sharp, vibrant video began to play. On the massive television screen, they saw Trent walking into my kitchen carrying a white ceramic bowl filled with hot chicken soup. Trent stopped moving and stared up at the television screen, his jaw dropping completely open in absolute horror. The high-definition audio from the hidden microphone kicked in, broadcasting the clear sound of Trent humming a cheerful little melody. We watched the digital version of Trent look over his shoulder, making absolutely sure no one was watching him from the adjacent living room space right then. Then the video showed him reaching deeply into his tailored suit jacket. He pulled out a small, clear plastic vial filled completely with crushed white powder. The crowd of wealthy suburban guests fell totally silent, watching the undeniable evidence of premeditated violence unfold right before their eyes. The microscopic camera lens installed under my wooden cabinets provided a perfect eye-level view of the marble countertop. We watched Trent unscrew the black plastic cap of the tiny vial. We watched him dump the heavy sedatives directly into the steaming bowl of chicken soup meant for an innocent senior citizen today. Margaret Sterling let out a sudden piercing scream that shattered the silence of the living room. Trent's mother covered her mouth with both her shaking hands, her eyes wide with total disbelief. Richard Sterling grabbed his wife's arm, staring at his criminal son with a mixture of profound shock and deep disgust. On the giant television screen, the digital version of Trent picked up a silver spoon and stirred the poisonous chemical mixture thoroughly into the hot broth. He wanted to make absolutely sure the heavy central nervous system depressants were completely dissolved into the warm liquid food I consumed. Then the digital version of Trent leaned his face very close to the bowl. His arrogant mouth curled into a sinister, triumphant smile that was now broadcast in massive high definition across his own living room. "Sleep tight, old man," the digital Trent whispered to the empty kitchen. "Your house belongs to me now." The recording echoed loudly off the high vaulted ceilings. Several guests actually physically recoiled, backing away from Trent as if he were carrying a highly contagious, deadly disease. People raised their smartphones higher, eager to record every single second of his absolute miserable public downfall today. Trent was physically shaking, his entire body trembling violently with raw fear. He looked around the crowded room, searching desperately for any friendly face, but he found absolutely nothing but pure disgust. Maya, my beautiful, brave daughter, was standing near the staircase with tears streaming heavily down her face. She looked at her husband, the man who had verbally and physically abused her for years, and she finally saw him for the pathetic, weak monster he truly was. Arthur Vance, the disgraced, corrupt public notary, suddenly realized the immense danger of his current legal situation inside this isolated suburban house. Arthur Vance slowly stepped backward away from the glass coffee table, trying to distance himself from the forged property deeds he had been hired to illegally authenticate. He turned around very quietly, attempting to slip out through the heavy wooden front doors and disappear into the affluent suburban neighborhood. I did not let him escape his active part in this criminal conspiracy. "Where do you think you are going, Arthur?" I demanded, speaking loud enough for the hidden federal microphone under my shirt to catch every single word. "You cannot walk away from the massive felony you committed here today." The guests standing near the entryway immediately shifted their positions naturally, forming a solid human wall blocking the heavy front doors. Arthur Vance stopped in his tracks, his shoulders slumping in total defeat. He knew he was completely trapped inside the house with a man who had anticipated every single move. Trent tried to speak, but his voice failed him completely. He just stood there sweating profusely under the bright recessed lighting. "You thought you were so incredibly smart, Trent," I said, taking a slow, deliberate step toward the trembling man. "You thought I was just useless old garbage property. You thought 40 years of pulling thick copper wire through solid concrete meant I lacked the intellectual capacity to see your pathetic little plan. You thought you could chemically execute my independence so you could steal my real estate and pay off your massive gambling debts. You thought you could manually empty my standard blood pressure medication and maliciously replace it with heavy central nervous system depressants." I reached into the inner breast pocket of my tailored charcoal suit jacket. I pulled out a thick folded piece of heavy white paper bearing the official blue seal of laboratory toxicology results. I held the official document high up into the air for everyone in the massive living room to clearly see. Then I forcefully threw the folded paper down onto the glass coffee table, right next to the forged property deeds and the solid gold pen. The heavy paper landed with a sharp, loud smack that commanded the absolute attention of every single person in the room. "That is a certified chemical breakdown from an independent private laboratory," I announced, my voice carrying the heavy, undeniable authority of absolute truth. "It details exactly what you put into my daily heart medication. The laboratory report confirms you were intentionally poisoning me with heavy, dangerous sedatives meant to chemically induce the severe physical symptoms of advanced dementia. You were attempting to manufacture a fake medical crisis so you could trick a judge into granting you emergency legal guardianship over my life and my finances. You wanted to lock me away in a miserable state-funded psychiatric facility where they drug the elderly and leave them staring at blank walls until they eventually expire. You wanted to bury me alive while my heart was still beating to steal absolutely everything I currently own today." Trent looked down at the official laboratory report sitting on his glass coffee table. He looked completely and utterly broken. The arrogant corporate executive facade had been entirely stripped away, leaving nothing behind but a desperate, broke, terrified criminal who had just been publicly exposed in front of everyone he desperately wanted to impress. "Attempted poisoning," I said, stating his crimes out loud for the hidden federal agents to perfectly document. "Forgery, fraud, elder abuse. You committed massive federal felonies today, Trent. You crossed state lines electronically when you used Maya's stolen identity to secure your cash loans right now. You engaged in a massive criminal conspiracy to steal an $800,000 house from a senior citizen. Did you really think you could outsmart the man who built the roof over your head? Did you truly believe you could step into my grid and not get completely electrocuted? I am a master electrician. Trent, I have spent my entire life managing power and grounding dangerous live wires. You were nothing but a careless sparking wire making a foolish mess in my territory, and I have officially cut your main power line permanently today, right here, right now, Trent. I am Leon Banks. I am 72 years old." Trent Sterling stood completely frozen in the center of his massive living room. The arrogant illusion of his perfect, wealthy suburban life was actively shattering into a million sharp, invisible pieces all around him. He looked wildly at the heavy front doors. His breathing became rapid and desperate. He realized the trap had fully closed around him. He lunged forward suddenly, aggressively, shoving past a wealthy guest in a pastel polo shirt. He was trying to sprint toward the main entryway. He was acting like a terrified coward attempting to flee from the catastrophic consequences of his own deliberate actions. But Trent did not even make it 3 steps across the polished hardwood floor. The heavy oak front doors violently swung open, hitting the interior wall with a massive, deafening thud. The cold Chicago wind rushed into the stifling heat of the crowded living room. Evelyn Carter walked directly through the open doorway. She was my late wife, Beatrice's oldest and most fiercely loyal friend. She was a ruthless corporate attorney, and she looked like the absolute physical embodiment of divine judgment. She wore a sharp, tailored charcoal blazer, and her dark eyes swept across the room, paralyzing every single person who dared to look at her. Evelyn was not alone. She was flanked on her left and right by 2 towering plainclothes federal agents wearing dark suits and serious expressions. Behind them, several uniformed local police officers stepped firmly into the grand foyer, blocking any possible avenue of escape. Trent stopped dead in his tracks. His expensive leather shoes skidded slightly on the pristine floor. He raised his trembling hands, stepping backward away from the federal agents. The wealthy guests in the living room scrambled backward, pressing their bodies tightly against the expensive white walls and the large stone fireplace. They eagerly held their smartphones high into the air, capturing every single miserable second of this spectacular public downfall. Evelyn stepped forward, taking total command of the massive room. She did not raise her voice, but her words cut through the dead silence like a perfectly sharpened surgical scalpel. Trent Sterling. Evelyn announced, her voice echoing with cold, absolute authority. You are completely out of time, and you are completely out of options. I am the senior legal counsel representing Leon Banks, and I am here to formally notify you that your entire fake empire has officially collapsed. Evelyn reached into her leather briefcase and pulled out a thick stack of official legal documents. She held them up for the entire room to clearly see. Your sprawling suburban estate is currently in active foreclosure, Evelyn stated, staring directly into Trent's terrified eyes. You have not paid your mortgage in 12 months. You have not brought home a legitimate corporate paycheck in an entire year. You were fired for gross financial misconduct, and you have been lying to your wife and your friends every single day since then. The guests gasped collectively. Several women covered their mouths in pure, unadulterated shock. Trent's parents, Richard and Margaret Sterling, shrank backward into the crowd. The arrogant superiority they had displayed just 30 minutes ago vanished entirely. Richard turned his face away toward the wall, attempting to hide his deep humiliation from the glowing screens of the recording smartphones. Margaret lowered her head, trying desperately to avoid making eye contact with her wealthy country club friends. Their golden child was being publicly exposed as a total fraud. Evelyn did not stop there. She stepped closer to the glass coffee table where the forged property deeds still rested. Trent Sterling. You owe $300,000 to illegal criminal syndicates operating in the South Side. Evelyn continued relentlessly. You lost $400,000 in an unregistered cryptocurrency scam, and you attempted to sell your father-in-law home to a shell company to save your own miserable life. You are a desperate drowning man, and your financial crimes have now officially crossed federal lines. Evelyn turned her sharp dark eyes toward Maya, who was standing frozen near the grand wooden staircase. The most sickening betrayal is what you did to your own wife, Evelyn said, her tone dripping with pure absolute disgust. You maliciously stole Maya's identity. You deliberately forged her signature on 3 separate federal bank loans. You completely destroyed her credit score and saddled her with massive high-interest debt, simply to fund your pathetic illusion of wealth. You financially trapped her in a marriage built entirely on lies and extreme manipulation. Trent was physically shaking his chest, heaving as he desperately gasped for air. He looked at the 2 federal agents who were now stepping slowly into the center of the living room. This is a mistake, Trent stammered, his voice cracking and high-pitched. I am a successful executive. I am a good man. Was just trying to help my sick father-in-law get the proper medical care he needed. He is insane. He made all of this up to ruin my flawless reputation. The lead federal agent reached into his jacket and pulled out a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. Trent Sterling, the federal agent said, his voice carrying the heavy, undeniable weight of the law. We have been listening to a live audio feed from a hidden microphone taped to Mr. Banks' chest. We heard you explicitly admit to attempting to chemically execute his independence. We watched the high-definition hidden camera footage of you pouring heavy central nervous system depressants into his food. You are under arrest for federal bank fraud, identity theft, conspiracy to commit medical fraud, and the attempted murder of a senior citizen. Trent let out a loud, pathetic sob. He dropped to his knees right in front of the glass coffee table, his expensive suit wrinkling as he surrendered to the absolute reality of his destruction. Please, Trent begged, looking up at the federal agents. Please do not do this. I will lose everything. I will pay the money back. I swear I will fix it. Nobody cared about his miserable apologies. The guests continued to film his humiliating breakdown. Richard and Margaret Sterling pushed their way quietly toward the back door, desperately trying to abandon their criminal son and escape the immense public shame. They did not care about defending him anymore. They only cared about protecting their own fragile social status. I stood tall, leaning slightly on my wooden cane, watching the man who had tormented my daughter finally face the severe consequences of his boundless greed. I felt a profound sense of absolute justice settling deep into my bones. Then, the heavy silence of the room was broken by a loud, gut-wrenching cry. Maya stepped forward from the staircase and her legs suddenly gave out beneath her. She collapsed heavily onto her knees, hitting the pristine hardwood floor. Her beautiful face was completely stained with hot tears. She wrapped her arms tightly around her stomach, rocking back and forth in pure, overwhelming agony. She looked at Trent, the man she had loved, and defended the man who had secretly destroyed her life, and she screamed with a pain that shattered my heart. "Dad," Maya cried out, looking up at me through her tears. "I did not know about the drugs, I swear to you, Dad. I did not know he was poisoning your food. I did not know he was trying to kill you. Please, Dad, you have to believe me. I did not know he was doing those horrible things to you." I looked down at my only biological daughter. My heart was physically aching watching her suffer so deeply. She was a victim of severe psychological and physical abuse. She was completely broken by a monster who used her love against her. I wanted to drop my cane and run to her. I wanted to pull her up from the cold floor and hold her tightly in my arms. I wanted to tell her that everything was going to be perfectly fine and that I would protect her from the nightmare, but I did not move. I stayed perfectly still, my posture rigid and my face a mask of unyielding stone. I could not rescue her by treating her like a fragile child. She needed to see the absolute destruction of her abuser. She needed to witness the complete dismantling of the toxic world she had desperately tried to protect. I looked at my daughter, my heart breaking into a million pieces, but my resolve made of solid, impenetrable iron. I knew this pain was highly necessary for her ultimate survival. She had to face the brutal, ugly truth right now before she could ever truly heal from his venomous grip. This harsh moment of supreme, absolute devastation was the only powerful medicine that would finally cure her blinding, deeply rooted denial. I stood incredibly strong and watched my beautiful broken daughter weep openly. I am Leon Banks. I am 72 years old. The two plainclothes federal agents stepped completely past Evelyn, moving with swift, absolute tactical precision. They did not hesitate. They did not offer Trent Sterling any room to negotiate or explain his massive, fraudulent crimes. The lead agent reached down and grabbed Trent by his expensive tailored collar, pulling him violently up from his knees. Trent let out a loud, pathetic squeal of pure terror. "Please, you do not understand," Trent begged, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "This is a massive misunderstanding. My father-in-law is confused. He is sick. He made all of this up to ruin my life." The agent ignored his pathetic lies completely. "Trent Sterling, you have the right to remain silent," the agent announced, his voice booming over the quiet, shocked murmurs of the wealthy guests. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law. You have the right to an attorney." Trent realized the absolute reality of his destruction. He realized he could not charm his way out of a federal indictment. The sheer panic in his eyes rapidly mutated into pure, unadulterated, explosive rage. He planted his expensive leather shoes firmly on the pristine hardwood floor and violently jerked his arm away from the federal agent. "I am not going anywhere," Trent screamed wildly, his face turning a deep, ugly shade of crimson. "I am a successful corporate executive. I am the victim here. That old man is a manipulative devil. He set me up. He planned this entire ambush to destroy my perfect life." The second federal agent stepped forward immediately, wrapping his thick, muscular arms around Trent's upper body. Trent fought back like a trapped rabid animal. He swung his elbows recklessly, knocking a crystal vase off a side table. The heavy glass shattered into a million pieces across the expensive rug. Trent kicked and thrashed, screaming absolute nonsense about his wealth and his status. He was completely out of control. The two agents grabbed him firmly by his shoulders and his belt, physically lifting him off the ground. They marched him aggressively toward the heavy oak front doors. Trent kicked his legs desperately in the air, shouting terrible, vicious curses at me. "You are a manipulative old devil, Leon," Trent roared, his voice echoing loudly as they dragged him outside. "You planned this. You ruined my life. I gave your daughter everything. I gave her this beautiful house, and you ruined it." I stood perfectly still, leaning slightly on my wooden cane, watching the federal agents drag him through the grand foyer and out into the bright afternoon sun. The local police officers waiting on the concrete driveway stepped forward to assist. They pulled Trent violently toward his massive black luxury sport utility vehicle, the vehicle he had proudly purchased using my daughter's stolen identity, the vehicle that was currently completely unpaid and facing imminent repossession. Trent refused to comply with the federal agents. He continued to kick and fight, twisting his body violently to avoid the heavy steel handcuffs. The lead federal agent finally lost his patience. He grabbed Trent by the back of his neck and slammed him aggressively face first onto the hot metal hood of the unpaid luxury vehicle. The loud, heavy thud of his body hitting the expensive car echoed across the sprawling suburban estate. The impact knocked the remaining fight completely out of him. Trent let out a loud, pathetic groan of pain, pressing his sweating cheek against the hot, black metal. The agent swiftly pulled Trent's arms forcefully behind his back. The sharp, metallic clicking sound of the heavy steel handcuffs locking tightly around his wrists sounded like absolute music to my ears. Trent Sterling was officially neutralized. The wealthy guests who had gathered in the living room slowly spilled out onto the front porch and the green lawn. They watched in absolute stunned silence as the golden child of their elite country club circle was publicly humiliated and restrained by federal law enforcement. Officers were thoroughly searching his pockets, pulling out his wallet and his expensive mobile phone. He looked absolutely miserable, stripped of his arrogant executive costume. He was nothing but a common criminal caught in a massive federal trap. Suddenly, the heavy silence was broken by loud, indignant shouting. Richard and Margaret Sterling Trent's wealthy and arrogant white parents pushed their way aggressively through the crowd of shocked guests. They marched directly up to me, their faces twisted into masks of pure arrogant fury. They completely ignored the undeniable video evidence they had just watched. They completely ignored the toxicology report sitting on the glass coffee table. They only cared about protecting their fragile social reputation and shielding their criminal son from facing any real consequences. "Leon, you need to stop this absolute madness right now," Richard Sterling demanded, pointing his finger directly at my face. "Tell these officers to release my son immediately. You are taking a simple family misunderstanding and blowing it completely out of proportion." Margaret stepped forward, her eyes glaring at me with sheer, unadulterated hatred. "You are a vicious, vindictive old man," Margaret hissed, her voice dripping with pure racial and class entitlement. "We welcomed your daughter into our wealthy family. We gave her an incredible life, and this is how you repay our immense generosity. You are completely destroying my son's flawless reputation. You will call your ruthless lawyer right now and you will drop every single one of these ridiculous charges. We have highly paid lawyers, Leon. We will sue you for everything you own. We will absolutely destroy you." I looked at Richard and Margaret Sterling. I looked at their expensive designer clothes and their perfectly manicured faces. I saw the exact same toxic arrogance that had poisoned their son. They truly believed that their money and their social privilege made them completely immune to the harsh realities of the law. I looked at them and I let out a deep, loud, booming laugh. My laughter echoed across the front lawn, startling the wealthy guests and the federal agents. It was a laugh of pure, absolute victory. "I am not dropping a single charge, Richard," I said, my voice filled with cold, unyielding iron. "He forged federal bank documents. He stole my daughter's identity to secure fraudulent loans. He owes hundreds of thousands of dollars to violent criminal syndicates operating out of the South Side. And worst of all, he actively poisoned my food with heavy sedatives. Your precious son tried to erase my mind to steal my bricks." I pointed my wooden cane directly at Trent, who was currently being forcefully shoved into the back of a waiting police cruiser. "Let us see exactly how much he likes living behind heavy steel bars." Margaret gasped loudly, bringing her hand up to clutch her expensive pearl necklace. Richard turned a sickly shade of pale, realizing that my offshore wealth and my legal team were vastly superior to anything he could ever afford. They could not bully me. They could not threaten me. "Your son is going to federal prison." "Margaret," I stated firmly, looking directly into her terrified eyes, "and there is absolutely nothing your country club money can do to save him from his ultimate destruction." Richard and Margaret Sterling slowly backed away, abandoning their son to the federal government. I turned back to the driveway. The federal agent slammed the heavy door of the squad car shut, trapping Trent inside the small cage with the dark-tinted windows. The vehicle slowly pulled away from the sprawling estate, carrying Trent Sterling away from his fake life forever. The wealthy elite guests who had attended the fake loving family barbecue realized the dramatic show was officially over. They scattered like frightened roaches, fleeing the bright lights. They rushed to their leased luxury vehicles, starting their engines and speeding away down the pristine suburban streets. They wanted to distance themselves completely from the absolute toxic ruin of the Sterling family. Within 5 short minutes, the massive estate was entirely empty, except for me, my ruthless lawyer, Evelyn, the remaining local police officers, and my beautiful broken daughter. Maya stood alone on the bright green grass of the expansive front lawn. She looked incredibly small and profoundly devastated. She wrapped her arms around her stomach, shaking violently as she wept openly. The heavy dark purple bruise on her fragile wrist was clearly visible in the bright afternoon sun. She was left completely alone, crying on the manicured lawn of a massive, heavily mortgaged house she no longer owned. I stood firmly on the driveway, gripping my wooden cane, watching my daughter weep. Her world had been completely burned to the ground, but it was the only way she could ever truly be free. Trent Sterling thought he could outsmart the man who built the roof over his head, but he had ultimately destroyed himself completely. I am Leon Banks. I am 72 years old. The flashing red and blue lights of the police cruisers faded into the distance, disappearing down the pristine streets of the wealthy neighborhood. The heavy, oppressive silence of the sprawling estate settled over the manicured green lawn. Evelyn, my ruthless corporate lawyer, gave me a firm nod and walked back to her waiting vehicle. She knew her job was done for the day. The federal agents were gone. The arrogant country club guests had scattered like terrified roaches. The caterers quietly packed their expensive equipment and fled out the back gate, leaving the outdoor kitchen completely abandoned. I stood leaning slightly on my wooden cane, looking at the ruins of my daughter's fake empire. The massive stone house loomed behind us, a monument to high-interest debt and federal bank fraud. It no longer belonged to Trent Sterling, and it certainly no longer belonged to Maya. The county tax liens and federal asset seizures would begin processing by Monday morning. Maya was still on her knees on the damp grass. Her expensive designer summer dress was stained with dirt and tears. She was wrapping her arms around her stomach, rocking back and forth in pure, overwhelming agony. I slowly walked over to her, my leather shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth. I stood over my only biological child, looking down at her shaking shoulders. Maya finally looked up at me. Her beautiful face was swollen and streaked with heavy, expensive makeup. She saw me standing there tall and resolute, and she scrambled to her feet. She lunged forward desperately, trying to wrap her arms around my chest, attempting to bury her face in my charcoal suit jacket. "Dad," she sobbed, her voice cracking with intense desperation. "Dad, please take me home. You have to take me home with you right now. I have absolutely nothing left. That monster took everything from me. I cannot stay here. The banks are going to take the house. I have no money. I have nowhere else to go. Please, Dad, let me move back into my old bedroom. Let me come back to your house. I will take care of you, I promise. I will be a good daughter again. We can just forget all of this ever happened." I kept my arms firmly at my sides. I did not wrap them around her shaking shoulders. I did not stroke her hair. I did not offer her the warm, unconditional comfort she was desperately seeking. I simply stood there like a pillar of solid, unyielding stone. I looked at the dark purple bruise on her fragile wrist, the physical evidence of Trent's violent control over her life. My heart physically ached for the pain she had endured behind closed doors, but my mind remained incredibly clear and cold. I gently but firmly placed my hands on her shoulders and pushed her a few inches away from my chest. Maya looked at me with wide, terrified eyes, confused by my physical rejection. "Dad," she pleaded, her voice dropping to a panicked whisper. "Why are you pushing me away? I am your daughter. I am the victim here. You saw what he did. You saw the police take him away. He manipulated me. He abused me. He ruined my credit score. He forced me to lie to you. I had absolutely no choice, Dad. You have to believe me. I was just trying to survive his terrible temper." I looked deeply into her tear-filled eyes, searching for true accountability, but finding only desperate self-preservation. "You are a victim of physical and emotional abuse, Maya," I said, my voice steady and low. "I see the bruise on your wrist. I know he hurt you, and I know he used terror to control you. My heart breaks from the pain you suffered in the dark. But being a victim of his violence does not completely erase your own deliberate choices. You watched that man disrespect me every single day. You sat at my dining room table and watched him toss a brochure for a miserable state-funded nursing home onto my dinner plate. You watched him belittle me and mock my intelligence. You actively participated in his coordinated ambush. You begged me to cooperate with a corrupt doctor who was hired to declare your own father mentally incompetent. You knew he was trying to throw me into a psychiatric facility so he could steal my bricks and sell my home." Maya shook her head violently, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "I was scared, Dad," she cried. "I was terrified of what he would do to me if I did not help him. He said he would leave me with all the massive debt. He said he would ruin my reputation at my law firm. I was just trying to protect my career. I was trying to protect our marriage. I thought if we just got you some professional help, he would finally calm down and stop hurting me. I did not know he was actually poisoning your food, Dad. I swear on my life. I did not know about the heavy sedatives. I would never let him kill you." "I believe you did not know about the poison, Maya," I replied, maintaining my rigid posture. "But you knew exactly what he was doing to my mind and my freedom. You knew he was trying to erase my independence, and you did absolutely nothing to stop him. You chose to protect your country club membership over your own father. You chose to protect your expensive designer clothes and your leased luxury vehicles over the man who worked 40 years pulling thick copper wire through concrete to put food on your table. You looked the other way because confronting the ugly truth meant losing your prestigious suburban illusion. You traded my dignity for your temporary financial comfort, and that is a choice you made completely on your own." Maya's face hardened slightly, a brief flash of defensive anger breaking through her pathetic victim routine. "How can you be so cruel to me right now?" she demanded, her voice rising in pitch. "I have lost my husband. I have lost my house. I have lost my entire social circle. I have absolutely nothing to my name, and you are standing here lecturing me about country club memberships. You are my father. You are supposed to protect me unconditionally. You are supposed to take me in when I have nowhere else to go. You have a massive 4-bedroom house that is completely empty. You have millions of dollars hidden in offshore accounts. You heard Evelyn say it. You have the power to fix all of this for me right now. You can pay off the loans he took out in my name. You can hire a legal team to save this estate. You can make this entire nightmare go away." I looked at my beautiful broken daughter, and I felt the last invisible string connecting us finally snap. "I love you, Maya," I said, my voice carrying the heavy, undeniable weight of absolute finality. "But I will not save you from the consequences of your own complicity. If I pay off your debts and let you move back into my house, you will never learn how to stand on your own 2 feet. You will simply replace Trent's financial control with my financial control. You will never face the harsh reality of the toxic world you helped build. I will pay for your intense trauma therapy, and I will pay the retainer for the most ruthless divorce lawyer in the city of Chicago. But I will not fund your lifestyle. I will not buy back this fake mansion. I will not pay for your designer clothes. You are going to have to find a small apartment. You are going to have to work a regular job. You are going to have to rebuild your life brick by brick, just like I did." Maya stared at me in absolute shock. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She realized the powerful father she underestimated was no longer her personal safety net. She realized her tears could not manipulate me into funding her miserable mistakes. She backed away, her shoulders slumping in ultimate defeat. I turned my back on my only child. I gripped my cane and walked away from the mortgaged estate, leaving her alone on the grass of a house she no longer owned. I walked down the pristine driveway and climbed into the driver's seat of my Mustang. I started the heavy engine, listening to the deep rumble vibrating through the cold Chicago afternoon. I put the car in gear and drove away down the quiet suburban street. The toxic ties were officially severed completely and forever. I am Leon Banks. I am 72 years old. 3 heavy months have passed since the federal agents dragged Trent Sterling away from his sprawling, heavily mortgaged estate. The swift and brutal machinery of the federal justice system did not show him any mercy whatsoever. Trent is currently sitting in a cold, concrete federal penitentiary cell facing a mandatory minimum sentence of 15 long years. His highly paid defense attorneys tried desperately to negotiate a lighter sentence, but the crystal-clear video of him pouring heavy sedatives into my chicken soup completely destroyed any chance of a plea deal. The prosecutors used the hidden microphone recordings to prove absolute, premeditated malice. Trent lost absolutely everything he claimed to own. The bank seized his massive mansion. The luxury vehicles were repossessed within a week. His wealthy, arrogant parents, Richard and Margaret Sterling, completely abandoned him when the scandal hit the local news. They packed up their things and quietly moved to Florida out of deep public shame. They never even showed up for his final sentencing hearing. Trent Sterling thought he was the smartest man in the entire city. but he ended up with absolutely nothing but a bright orange jumpsuit and a tiny windowless cell. He will spend 15 years surrounded by the harsh reality he thought his money made him immune to. My beautiful daughter Maya is slowly learning how to breathe again. She is living in a small apartment on the north side of the city. The transition was incredibly harsh. She went from a massive fake mansion to a cramped space where she can touch both kitchen walls at once, but it is the very first space she has ever truly owned. She is working her first real job in over 5 years as a paralegal at a modest downtown firm. I kept my strict promise to her. I paid the retainer for the most ruthless divorce lawyer in Chicago, and I covered the absolute full cost of her intensive trauma therapy. But I did not give her a single penny. To fund a luxurious lifestyle, I let her feel the heavy weight of financial independence. Maya takes the public train to work every single morning. She buys her own groceries and she pays her own rent. She called me last week, crying because she finally managed to pay off her first credit card using only the money she earned from her own hard work. For the very first time in her adult life, she sounded genuinely proud of herself. She is slowly unlearning the toxic dependency Trent forced upon her, and she is rebuilding her life, brick by solid brick. This morning, I drove my 1968 Mustang to the quiet green cemetery on the edge of the city. I walked across the damp grass carrying a fresh bouquet of yellow lilies. They were always her absolute favorite flowers. I stood in front of the smooth, polished marble headstone reading the name of my late wife, Beatrice Banks. I took a deep breath, letting the cold morning air fill my lungs. I felt a profound sense of absolute peace settling deep into my chest. I spoke to her quietly, telling her everything that had happened over the past 3 turbulent months. I told her that our daughter was finally safe from the monster who had hurt her. I told her that the massive offshore trust she had secretly built was completely secure, untouched by the greedy hands of fraudulent men. I promised her that I had not spent a single dime of her $8,500,000 on flashy, useless things. I did not buy a new house. I did not buy a private island. I did not purchase expensive designer suits or luxury cars to show off to strangers. I told Beatrice that her brilliant, quiet sacrifice was going to change the entire world for people who truly needed it. I explained my ultimate plan to my beautiful wife. I took her massive financial legacy, and I quietly bought out an entire abandoned city block in our old neighborhood on the south side of Chicago. I purchased 5 empty commercial buildings that had been rotting for a decade. I hired a team of local architects and structural engineers to completely gut the buildings and connect them into one massive, cohesive structure. I am building a state-of-the-art community center for at-risk Black youth in our city. The statistics in our community are absolutely devastating. In certain neglected neighborhoods across the south and west sides, nearly 30% of young Black men face profound systemic barriers to higher education and steady employment. The lack of safe after-school programs directly correlates with heightened juvenile incarceration rates. I read a recent study showing that structured community investments can reduce neighborhood crime by over 40% within the first 3 years. Our youth do not need pity. They need solid resources. They need modern computer labs. They need quiet, safe spaces to study, and they need vocational training workshops where they can learn real, tangible trades, like electrical work, plumbing, and carpentry. I'm going to use Beatrice's legacy to give them the exact same tools that saved my life. 50 years ago, I stood by her grave and explained every single detail of the upcoming construction project. I told her how I hired local Black-owned contracting firms to do the heavy demolition work, keeping the money circulating directly inside our own community. I told her about the massive indoor basketball court, the state-of-the-art recording studio, and the comprehensive financial literacy center. We are building on the 2nd floor. I want these kids to learn how to manage credit, how to secure mortgages, and how to build generational wealth, so no arrogant corporate predator can ever take advantage of them. I want them to know their absolute worth before the world tries to tell them they have none. I smiled, looking down at the carved letters of her name. I felt her spirit standing right there next to me, approving of every single decision I had made. We built a beautiful life together, Beatrice, and now we are going to build a beautiful future for thousands of children who desperately need a fighting chance. I placed the lilies at the headstone, turned around, and walked to my car, feeling lighter than I had in 3 years. Maya actually drove down to the south side yesterday afternoon to see the construction site for herself. She parked her used compact car across the street and walked over to where I was standing with the head architect. She was wearing sturdy boots and a simple denim jacket. Her expensive designer clothes are completely gone, sold online to help pay for her modest apartment furnishings. Maya looked at the massive steel beams rising into the sky, and she actually smiled, a genuine, beautiful smile. She told me she wants to use her paralegal experience to host free legal clinics in the new center once the doors officially open. She wants to help other vulnerable women who are trapped in financially abusive marriages, understand their rights, and find a safe way out. I looked at my daughter and I saw the incredible strength of her mother shining clearly in her eyes. Trent tried his hardest to break her spirit, but he only succeeded in burning away the fake suburban illusion she was hiding behind. Now she is stepping into her true power, returning to her roots and lifting others up along with her. The dark purple bruise on her wrist has completely faded away, leaving behind a woman made of pure, unyielding steel. Now I am sitting on the wide wooden porch of my paid-off 4-bedroom house, the very same house Trent Sterling desperately tried to steal from me. The afternoon sun is shining brightly, casting long, warm shadows across the quiet suburban street. I have a hot cup of black coffee resting on the small table next to my chair. Spread out across my lap are the massive detailed blueprints for the new community center. I trace my calloused fingers over the thick blue lines, looking at the electrical grids I will personally help install. I am 72 years old, but my hands are perfectly steady, and my mind is completely sharp and functioning at its absolute highest capacity. The neighborhood is perfectly quiet and incredibly peaceful today. There are no arrogant sons-in-law trying to manipulate my finances. There are no corrupt doctors trying to drug me into submission. There are no fake friends waiting in the shadows to see me fall from grace. I look down at the beautiful architectural drawings and then look up at the blue sky. I take a slow, deep, satisfying sip of my hot black coffee, feeling the comforting warmth spread completely through my chest. I protected my daughter. I destroyed the monster who tried to bury me, and I secured a legacy that will outlive me by 100 years. I won. I am Leon Banks. I am 72 years old. 6 months have passed since the flashing lights of the federal police cruisers faded into the distance, taking Trent Sterling away from his fake suburban castle. The heavy, oppressive silence that used to fill my house has been completely replaced by a profound and unbreakable peace. Today, the warm afternoon sun poured through the large bay windows of my living room, illuminating the massive architectural blueprints spread across my dining table. The community center on the south side is fully funded and construction is moving forward ahead of schedule. I was sitting in my leather recliner drinking a hot cup of black coffee when the doorbell rang loudly, echoing through the quiet hallway. I set my mug down and walked slowly to the front door, leaning just slightly on my wooden cane. I pulled the heavy oak door open. Standing on the porch was Ms. Davies, the branch manager from the First National Bank. She was dressed in a sharp navy blue blazer, holding a thick leather briefcase in her hands. She gave me a warm, professional smile. "Good afternoon, Leon," she said, her voice filled with deep respect. "I brought the final transfer documents for the offshore trust just as you requested." I stepped aside and invited her into my home. She walked into the living room and her eyes immediately fell upon the massive blueprints unrolled across the table. She walked over and studied the intricate electrical grids and structural plans I had personally drawn up for the community center. She looked at the blueprints and then she looked back at me. Her smile widened, reaching all the way to her eyes. She finally understood the absolute magnitude of the game I had played. She realized that the frail, confused old man who had walked into her bank vault 6 months ago was actually the sharpest, most calculating mind in the entire city of Chicago. "You completely fooled them, Leon," she said softly, shaking her head in pure amazement. "You had them all convinced that your mind was fading away while you were secretly engineering the greatest financial trap I have ever witnessed in my 30 years of banking." I walked over to the table and picked up a silver pen. I did not tremble. I did not hesitate. I looked at the bank manager who had protected my late wife Beatrice and her massive secret fortune. "Beatrice knew exactly what she was doing when she trusted you, Ms. Davies," I replied, my voice steady and strong. "She knew you would recognize a fraud when Trent walked into your lobby demanding access to her safe deposit box. We protected her legacy together, and now we are going to use it to build something that will outlast all of us." Ms. Davies opened her leather briefcase and placed the final legal documents on the glass coffee table. These papers will officially transfer the entire $8,500,000 from the Cayman Islands Blind Trust directly into the newly established nonprofit foundation, she explained. Every single penny will go toward the construction and operation of the Youth Community Center. Trent Sterling and his corrupt lawyers will never be able to touch a single brick of this project. I took the silver pen and signed my name on the bottom line of every single page. My signature was firm, bold, and completely undeniable. With every stroke of the pen, I felt the heavy burden of the past few years lifting completely off my shoulders. The money was finally safe. It was no longer a secret weapon hidden in a dark steel box. It was now a beacon of hope for thousands of at-risk children who needed a safe place to learn and grow. Ms. Davies carefully packed the signed documents back into her briefcase. She shook my hand firmly, her grip conveying a silent message of ultimate victory. "It has been an absolute honor working with you, Leon," she said, walking toward the front door. "Beatrice would be incredibly proud of the man you are and the future you are building." I thanked her and watched her drive away down the pristine suburban street, leaving me completely alone in my quiet house. I walked out onto the wide wooden back porch and sat down in my favorite rocking chair. The late afternoon sky was painting the horizon in brilliant shades of orange and deep purple. I listened to the gentle rustling of the wind through the tall oak trees in my backyard. The silence was absolute and unbreakable. There were no arrogant voices demanding my money. There were no toxic family members plotting my demise. There was only peace. Trent is currently sitting in a tiny concrete cell surrounded by the harsh reality of his federal prison sentence. He has 15 long years to think about the man he tried to destroy. Maya is living in a cramped one-bedroom apartment, taking the public train to her paralegal job every single morning. She is learning the heavy but necessary price of true independence. She calls me once a week and we speak briefly but honestly. The toxic country club illusion is completely gone, replaced by the brutal but beautiful reality of hard work. I did not save her from her consequences, but I saved her from a life built entirely on lies. I thought about the corrupt doctor who had tried to sign away my sanity. He is currently facing severe federal indictments and the permanent loss of his medical license. Arthur Vance, the disgraced notary, is cooperating with the authorities from his own jail cell, hoping for a reduced sentence. Evelyn, my ruthless corporate lawyer, ensured that every single person who participated in Trent's malicious conspiracy faced the absolute maximum penalty under the law. They thought they could manipulate the legal system to steal my property, but they ended up building their own cages. The justice was swift, brutal, and completely uncompromising. I watched the sun dip below the horizon, casting long, dark shadows across the manicured lawn. I am a master electrician. I spent my entire life learning how to control dangerous currents and ground volatile live wires. When Trent Sterling stepped into my grid expecting an easy victim, he met a force of nature he could never possibly comprehend. I pulled the plug on his fake empire and watched him fade completely into the dark. I survived the ambush. I protected my bricks, and I reclaimed my absolute sovereignty. I took a slow, deep sip of my hot black coffee, letting the warmth spread through my chest. I looked up at the vibrant sunset, feeling the spirit of my late wife sitting right there beside me. We had fought the ultimate battle, and we had emerged completely victorious. I secured my freedom, I protected my legacy, and I burned a parasite out of my life permanently. I leaned back in my rocking chair, closing my eyes and enjoying the perfect, unbroken silence of a man who has absolutely nothing left to fear. Never mistake a quiet man for a weak one. We live in a world that assumes age brings fragility and silence equals ignorance. But true power does not need to shout, and true wealth does not need to be displayed. When you invite greed into your home, you give away your peace. I had to tear down the illusion of my family to save my own life. Blood might make you relatives, but only respect, loyalty, and basic human decency make you family. Protect your dignity at all costs, because once you let someone treat you like a burden, you become their victim. Before you go, let me know what you thought of my story in the comments section below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel if you believe that true justice always catches up to the greedy. I will see you all in the next video.